Hey now, everybody. Hey now, hey now, hey now. We are live. We are the Council of Tolkien, and our adventure will begin shortly. Now, let's see if I could get the word out on my phone and so that it doesn't mess everything up. There it is. I have this wonderful ability, guys, to copy something on my phone and then paste it on my computer and vice versa. Isn't that a...
I actually have an app that is my entire phone sitting on my computer,
Is that
but it's
the...
a little scary.
Is that the Windows link to desktop thing?
Yeah,
That's what I've been using. But I don't know if you know this. When you have that linked, if you copy something with the clipboard on one device, you could paste it onto the other, which
that is actually very good to
I
know.
have found to be wonderful. So I'm just gonna. Usually I do this with my computer, but I'm doing it with my phone so that I don't mess anything up on the stream. Since I need it pointed at
Hey, John,
Discord.
how much time do I have before we go live?
We are live. I told you as soon as you hear me say "Hey now," we're live.
We're live.
Yeah, we are live. We are on the starting soon. Our adventure shall begin shortly screen. So we haven't begun the actual show yet, but we are broadcasting.
And no bathroom breaks for 2.5 hours. Sit tight, guys.
If you very much need a bathroom break, just speak up and we can do that. I mean, there's no problem with that. Oh, where am I? Here it is.
You mean I didn't need to buy a whole box of Depend?
And there goes Matt. That's too funny. Just for anybody out there, Sid's joking. He's not being
I'm glad
serious.
you told them that, whether
Yeah.
it's true or not.
Yeah, he doesn't need Depends. He has a catheter. It leads directly outside and waters the plants. Oh, that's vile. There's something wrong with me. I'm sorry, guys. I'm just not used to doing this with my phone, but I'm getting there. Okay, one more. Da, 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 da. Why do you have so many channels here? There it is. All right, and I'm going to post on Facebook and all that. All right, and the last one's Twitter. I refuse to call it X. Okay, we're good. We're good. Whew. So, how are you gentlemen doing today? Since we're sitting here just relaxing right now.
I wanted to say happy Independence Day to my fellow Americans out there.
The way you say that is very presidential. My fellow Americans. I expect Bill.
Happy Fourth.
Bill.
Happy Fourth, bro.
Bill Pullman will play the role of Mad in the movie about our lives. He'll be the president from that movie, Independence Day.
No, but seriously, happy Fourth, guys.
Yeah.
You know what's wonderful right now? It is pouring rain outside. That is so wonderful
Really?
for me. It is pouring
It's
rain
not.
here in Pennsylvania. And I'm so happy about that because that means that my neighbors will not be shooting off fireworks all night, driving my dog insane.
Oh, my
Wow.
poor
Yeah.
cat
Well,
will stay hidden for a couple
Yeah.
days.
The last few days have been, because they don't just do the fireworks on the 4th, they do them all week long. So it's been rough. He barks at them, he runs around, he gets very scared, you know. For a big dog, he's a little kitty cat on the inside.
I actually have a really funny story. That one 4th of July, somewhere around 1981, I was visiting a friend who lived in a brownstone in Brooklyn. And
That's where I'm from.
she was, and I met her in college when we were visiting her parents' house, and her dad and other friends on the block did this 4th of July block party every year. And right before we started, there was this thing on the news about an entire fireworks factory that had blown up. Fortunately, nobody was in it. No one was in it at the time. But we're talking about just literally a massive warehouse and factory that were just gone. And we're sitting there talking. And meanwhile, her dad and 2 cousins from down this block are sitting there tossing fireworks one by one and then 2 by 2 out into the street. And then they get bored and they just put all 3 cardboard boxes out in the street and drop a match in and blow them all up.
Oh my God.
And I turned to my friend Amy and I said, Amy, did it occur to you that those boxes of fireworks were in your basement all week?
That's wild.
We have absolutely clear, sunny skies with no clouds in sight on any horizon. That's how beautiful it is right now in Seattle.
Yeah. We've got light overhead clouds and sun, but we've had weeks of rain, so I really appreciate that right now.
Like I said, as a pet owner, I'm very happy for the rain today.
Yeah.
That's,
It can be tough.
It is, especially when he I had the other dog, the one that was like my dog, that he would cower and cry, and I'd have to hold him. This guy though, my mom's dog, he just barks, and I didn't really want to do the podcast and have him all night, So the fact that I can hear the rain is very, very comforting to me. I was trying to make a post onto the Grey Havens about us being live, and I found that I cannot really do that with my phone, so I'm doing it on my computer.
And it is 7:30. We are truly live.
We are live as heck. Yes, we are extra live. If we were any more live, we'd be immortal, like the Nazgul angered to the world. Which I saw your answer to that. Said I had answered that same question. And it's always interesting to see 2 people tackle the same question. I had one this week about Shadowfax, specifically about why couldn't Theoden ride Shadowfax when he was the king, and he's like the guy. And I was going to answer it, and then I saw that Laurel had answered it, and her answer was so thorough that I was like, well, I don't need to go over all these points. I'll just refer to her answer and add one more thing. And she brought up things like Theoden's age and his and the horse's age and the whole gelding process and everything, and how the time wasn't right for him to try to do that. And then I said I wanted to add also that he already had a horse, and that they tended to have one horse that they were bonded with. He had Snowmane, and Laurel had the wonderful theory that Shadowfax was meant for Theodred, his son. And
interesting.
Obviously, he never got to ride Shadowfax either. He was killed in the Westfold. But I thought that was a really good theory.
I've always just seen that Shadowfax was meant for Gandalf. That perhaps none of the chiefs of the Maeros had been written in centuries.
Well, I agree with you that on the larger scale of things, he was absolutely meant for Gandalf. But I meant in terms of the king's intention of keeping the horse, that he may have been for Theodred. That may have been his intention as the king of the horse lords. But we can think of Laurel as our Rohan expert in a sense, right?
And actually, a detail that is not in the books that Tolkien clarified in his letters was, it is said as they're getting on the ship to sail west, that Gandalf rode in on a gray horse, but what horse that was and what happened was never identified. But Tolkien in his letter said, I can't know for sure, but I think and hope that a bond such as between Gandalf and Shadowfax cannot be broken. And he sailed to the west with Gandalf the White. So
yeah, I agree with that. Yeah. And I think that the only reason that he didn't say that was Shadowfax was because the the focal point of that, and we talked last month about um, narrative voice and who's telling the story. That was Sam, who didn't necessarily know the horse like that. You know, Merry or Pippin could have been able to identify it, but they weren't the ones telling the story. So we have to go by Sam's word that it was just this really big gray horse that Gandalf was on. I read a very interesting and very, very, very obscure bit of Tolkien lore not long ago to research for a question about the nature of animals in the Undying Lands, and I found that the Valar cannot meddle with the doom of man, nor can they meddle with the fate of the elves, but they absolutely can and often do make animals and plants immortal if they are in the Undying Lands. So, for their own delight, and because they do not wish death to stain the land of Aemon. So we can also make an assumption that Shadowfax was immortal at that point.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of tend to agree with. Well, I mean, I think it's more trending in the work he's got out there that says that Shadowfax was obviously the Lord of the Maris, and
Mirrors.
I find it Maris, yeah, that he would be designated for Theodred is a good theory, but I just don't. It seems like the Lord of the Maris would have not have been necessarily a rideable or intended to be a rideable horse, and they had trouble taming him and getting him um, tamed early on, and they just set him aside as something they weren't going to be able to deal with because they realized what he was. Does that strike you guys as having some basis to some of the
Yes.
passages?
Yes, I see it your way and I see it Laurel's way, and we can't know for sure because it is conjecture, but I do see both sides of it.
Poetically, the title Lord of the Maeros is Lord of entire species. He's the Lord of all the lordly horses in Rohan. He's got to be busy.
Yeah, and it's interesting that we could make an assumption that Shadowfax could be descended directly from Orome's horse himself, you know.
Oh, I always presumed that.
Yeah.
I always presumed the Maeros were essentially the royal family of horses of Rohan, and were more likely to be continuous than even the kings of Rohan were.
Rokolor was the horse of Orman.
Yep. All right. Well, we're going to go ahead and we're going to go over to our live screen here. So this month we are in Rivendell, as you see, for the Council of Tolkien. We're going to start with introductions. My name is John Sierra. You guys know who I am. If you're on my channel, I am a Tolkien scholar. I've been studying the Legendarium since the 80s when I was a young lad and I first read The Hobbit and then The Lord of the Rings shortly after that. To my Well, it's confusing because I'm mirrored here, but to the right side of the screen is Sid Kemp. Sid, go ahead and introduce yourself briefly.
Hello, everybody, and welcome. I'm delighted to be here. I read The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings at summer camp of all places when I was 12 years old. The books were being passed around the bunk, and as Tolkien says, the great value of reading these things is escape. And boy, did I want to escape both my home and my summer camp.
You need a vacation from the vacation?
Exactly. And I've been living in Middle-earth ever since. And for me, the essence of what I do is to see it as epic in the spiritual sense, a guide for how to live our lives well and make it real in this late and difficult age in which we live.
Matt, of course, is over here. Matt Richardson, also known as... I didn't say the Elvish versions. I'm Erolise Oronte. Sid is Alcar, Arato, and Matt. Of course, you're Anavati Haranian. Go ahead and do a little introduction as well.
Well, hi, folks. Thanks for joining the show today. I got my start probably in 1976 when I read The Hobbit at the recommendation of my mom, but I loved it so much. And in 1977, when the Silmarillion was published, I remember getting a copy of that, but I didn't read it for a few more years after that. But that's pretty much the time that I started, and that was a long time ago. And it's been fun to go in and out of this in my life as far as being able to deal with it in a professional way or semi-professional way or a scholarly way. And I used to teach some of the ethics courses at the Naval College, where I kind of come from, and Tolkien comes up once in a while in our ethics and development of morals type discussions, is when it comes to society and discussions like that. And as we sit here today, I just continue to be interested in being a teacher and a helper in this field because there's a lot of people who want to know what's going on with Tolkien and things, and I'm glad they're here to learn because that's what we're here to do, is to help teach and help people figure out what Tolkien is really talking about.
Matt, you said something very interesting there, and I have to ask, when you're in this academic setting and, different ideas are being bandied about and such, when somebody brings up Tolkien out of the blue, do you just like get a big smile on your face like my time has come?
Well, what happens is that this discussion happens in a course or in ethics, ethics courses that deal in social, society, and literature, the literature of those societies, because that literature has to do with perspectives, um, the development of morals,
The humanities.
moral relative, yeah, humanities types discussions, but it's really designed around ethics and philosophy. So they'll come up in in those settings, and Tolkien is a very deeper than a lot of people think. I don't try to go out of my way to cover Tolkien in those classes, but he does come up as one of the great teachers about the deep struggle between the good and the bad and the light and the dark forces of the universe, and that's really where he's speaking, and that's why it's not wholly, totally a Christian work. It's really a kind of a philosophic, cosmic work in which Christianity has obviously some of its supportive elements to it, as we all know from Tolkien himself. So yeah, it is interesting, and it's continually fun to develop and dig down and get deeper on some of these topics.
Okay,
And
so
one of the most
oh,
important
sorry, go
things,
ahead, Sid. Go ahead.
yeah, no problem. One of the most important things he himself said about that is that in The Lord of the Rings, it is not a war story. War happens to be the exciting backdrop, so you'll all read it.
Mm-hmm.
It is a story about growing and cultivating the good, about stewardship.
Uh,
That phrase
I
too,
would
stewardship, is so important, I think.
let me add one thing to that because that's totally right, Sid, 100%. The other thing I see him doing is celebrating the valiant and the awareness that the valiant have about what the evil forces are doing and what they're capable of doing. There's that part of it too. So yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So before we get started with our regular segments, we're gonna turn it over to Sid, because Sid, you had some sort of anecdote that you definitely wanted to not tell me earlier. You wanted to have it live on the show. So go ahead. I heard this is going to be very amusing.
Okay. My wife and I were laughing for 15, 20 minutes when we caught this. And actually, John, you last week gave me the background for it
Oh no.
when you mentioned that Tolkien's first job out after World War One was being a writer, putting words into the Oxford English Dictionary, which I had not known. So here's a guy, we know how much he loves words. We now know that he was writing the OED and he misspelled the word dwarfs. In English, the word is dwarfs, Dwarfs, and he was writing quickly, and dwarves with a VES sounded good to him, and he wrote it, and he didn't look it up in the dictionary. He didn't check.
And we
And
were
then,
talking about this not too long ago, but go ahead, Sid.
yeah, and then the beautiful thing is that so many of the things we like to ask about and debate about and dig deeper began with Tolkien's honest mistakes. So once he made the mistake and it was published, he had a need to, if he could, somehow make it work. And he decided that his species called themselves dwarves as a collective and a plural, and that distinguished them from your general run-of-the-mill dwarf up in the Alps.
Yeah.
And the same thing happened with Glorfindel, because he brought Glorfindel into the end of the Third Age, forgetting that he'd killed him off at the end of the First Age.
And that led
and
to
then
the
and,
immortality
and
of
then
the elves.
elevate, well, not only the immortality, but the amazing elevation of Glorfindel because of how valiant he was.
Mm-hmm.
And this is what Tolkien tended to do. Whenever he made a mistake, he did a retcon.
Yeah, that's true. He's not the first
But
example of retroactive continuity, but he's one of the most well-known examples of
also
it.
the retcon almost always elevates
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
the person. The four versions of Galadriel's story, she becomes more beautiful and more powerful, stepping up 3 times. And this happens
absolutely.
over and over. And
Um,
that's what that valiant and brilliant is all about.
and the dwarves versus dwarfs thing is so fascinating because I was having two discussions, one of which was on stream, and the other of which was privately with my mother, and we were talking about the Mandela effect. And the Mandela effect is based on this idea that many people have this very vivid memory of Nelson Mandela dying in or around the 90s, which was not the truth. So then they would see him on television. He died in something like 2014 or somewhere around there. But they would see him and they'd be like, I thought he died years ago. And they would have this memory of seeing a funeral and everything on television and a big to-do in the news. And it just wasn't the case. And it became known as the Mandela effect, remembering something very vividly that didn't happen. And I said, it happens all the time. And I said, I just finish this thought for me. Snow White and the Seven, and everybody says dwarves. And I said, if you look at the folklore or the Disney movie or anything related to it, it always says dwarfs. Because that was considered, at the time, the proper pluralization, but not so much anymore. Everybody says dwarves, and it's interesting when I point out that comes from Tolkien, that people are like, wow, really? I thought it came from, way earlier.
Well, when you think about the linguistics of English, there's these weird conundrums where these singular terms like dwarf with how it ends with an F is always modified in the plural. And this is one of the cases where it was never modified in the plural. And so in actuality, I hate to defend Tolkien because I'm a Tolkien, fan, but his correction actually makes more sense than not. I mean, it's a pluralization of the ending of the word that doesn't use the
Yeah.
F that's from the singular. So in one sense, it makes some sense.
Yeah, and
I
going to his writing of The Hobbit, because the editors were very insistent on changing every instance of dwarves to dwarfs, and they at one point told him, look it up in the dictionary, and his response, which may be apocryphal, but the way that I've heard that he answered was, I am the dictionary.
that sounds apocryphal.
Oh no, it was
But
it was close to that, John. It was a letter of complaint about something that he got from the editors, Allen and Unwin, and it was Unwin that came back to him and said, I think there's got some errors in here, and Tolkien's quip in writing in a letter to Unwin, the chairman of the board, was, there's no reason to argue with somebody about this term. I was one of the ones that wrote the Oxford Dictionary. So,
Yeah. Yeah, I've heard a few different variations on it. I mean, that's the one we know 100%. But I've heard a few versions of him saying it out loud, and like Sid says, it sounds apocryphal. But just like him telling a fan in a pub to shut up when asked about the Eagles, that didn't happen. That actually comes from an audio recording of a very, very convincing Tolkien impersonator, who was not trying to fool anybody, but when it got re-uploaded to the internet years later, it was just put up there as, this is J.R.R. Tolkien, and the person who was actually speaking did not receive any credit. But they nailed his cadence and his stuttering and everything about the way that he spoke. And as this 3-minute video is counting down, and he's talking about how he's going to explain why they didn't take the Eagles to Mordor, and you're like, how is he going to explain it when there's like 2 minutes left, 1 minute left, 30 seconds left, and then he goes at the end, and I told him, shut up. And it's very funny, but his actual response was, the Eagles are not a taxi service.
Yeah. The fun real things my favorite in the letters is he actually received a fan letter from Sam Gamgee. Not the Hobbit, a real guy who lived in England whose name happened to be Sam
That's
Gamgee.
amazing. I did not know that one.
Yes.
That's amazing.
And that's when he goes on a long rant about how Samwise actually means not half wise, but half wit.
Yeah. Well, wit wise. I mean, there was, you could think of the limitations of the translation and transliteration, just like speak friend and say friend are the same translation in Sindarin, and that's why Gandalf had such a hard time getting into Moria.
Yeah.
Now, if he had just read it out in Sindarin, the door would have popped right open.
Well, I wonder about that. Is it just about getting the words right, or is it about delivering it as a magical spell? I think if somebody just happened to walk by and say friend, I don't think it would have popped.
I think it would have, but you got to remember that the doors were never really meant to be closed. That they in the good days of friendship between Khazad-dûm and Eregion, they stood open with friendly dwarves welcoming in their elvish friends, and it was only closed in times of danger, but they still wanted the elves to be able to enter.
This is one of those moments we were talking about right before we went live, where we can really enjoyably disagree. I would say if the doors were only meant to be closed in defense, then the magical word would be protective and would only work by somebody who really knew what they were doing. So we're just seeing it totally differently, which is totally cool.
And it's interesting because, the movie version gave us this dramatic thing where Frodo says, "What is the Elvish word for friend?" And he says melon, and it pops open. Whereas in the book, we don't know the exact circumstance of the scene, which because it was following, Frodo and Boromir by the lake, and then Gandalf comes rushing over and says the door is open. And it's so funny. I mistranslated. All I needed to do was say friend, but he didn't say. We don't know how Gandalf said it. Did he bellow it, or did he just read it? So either interpretation, I think, is wholly valid.
But he also credited Mary for getting it right. And asking, what is the word friend? Go ahead, Matt. Sorry.
I have a thought about that. Of course, it's interpretive, but we kind of know from the accounts of Gandalf that when he said words like this, he was a wizard. He was a Maya, and he knew the sense of his voice, and like Saruman did, and knew the sense of magical items that needed a particular command or something like that. So when I read it in the book, in its own word, melon, I felt that the way that the Jackson team did it in the movie was very accurate. That there was some kind of not a very direct command, and that the word had to be spoken in a certain way of command or acknowledgement that the doors would hear, if that makes sense to us. And so I think both of those things are true. One, there was the word, but also possibly that it couldn't just be happenstantial word, like if it would pick up a conversation of people talking to each other, or friend, the term would come up in a 20-sentence or 20-word long sentence, and the door would open if it was casual. But if it was a command of some kind by itself and the door heard it clearly, then it would open. So I think there's room for interpretation of both things being true.
I want to build on what you just said, Matt, and it could be possible that the person speaking has to actually be a friend.
Interesting idea. I'd like to take it even further. We know that Tolkien loves foreshadowing, and I love rereading I once reread the whole trilogy just to find as much foreshadowing as I could, and I only saw this one now. At the entrance of Moria, he speaks a single word in a commanding way, and the door opens. Go to when the Balrog first appears and chases them, and he speaks a word to command a door to stay closed. And the Balrog shatters his spell and exhausts him. So we have word, door, command foreshadowed before word, door, command again.
And Tolkien was
Yeah.
specific about the usage of the word command in the Balrog scene with a capital C,
Yes.
where it's not just a command that a king would give, or a war leader would give. It's the command of one of the Ainur. It's the voice of creation, as Gandalf as Aragorn was one of the many voices that created the world. His using his voice in a sense like that is the most powerful magic in the universe. It's directly Iluvatar's will.
It's the echo
Yes. And
of the creator saying, "Let there be light,"
Mm-hmm.
the beginning of
Yes,
time. And it
you
happens
know,
once more
in
when
oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
it happens once more when Gandalf the White says, "Saruman, your staff is broken."
Absolutely, that's
The
the Ainur
the
Lindali right there.
Yeah, and the demotion had already been ordained by Eru. This is in Tolkien's letters, but it was enacted by the power of the word in
Yeah.
that moment.
And especially that Gandalf gave him a chance to repent there, and that he did not take that chance. But you you said something, and it tickled something in my brain, and now my brain is untickled. I don't remember what I was going to say. It was about the
let me
voice
interject
thing.
one thing. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
No, go ahead, because I don't remember what I was going to say.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Jump in when you want to reclaim. I was going to say you would have to, the creator of the doors going into Moria, obviously was an elf, and a very highly skilled elf at that. And so I think that getting into the door like that would have taken a almost a deliberate command and from somebody who was literally in their spirit sense a friend. So I tend to agree with that because not because I think that just for the passage, but because as Sid said earlier, there's too many other passages where that type of tone and inflection and deliberate casting of a particular command through a spell is how it is in almost the rest of the whole uh, legendarium. They're all kind of like that. So it seems to be consistent.
As is the declaration, "You are an elf friend." That
Mm-hmm.
clearly has an incredible. We could spend a whole half hour on this one.
Yeah,
Maybe I'll do that next month.
maybe we will,
What
because
it means to be
we had a
declared an elf
discussion
friend.
about that not too long, about the elf friend thing. Me and Sid had a discussion about that. I wish I remembered what I was going to say about Gandalf. It was my pith has drained from me here. I don't remember exactly what it was, but oh, this isn't it. But I was also thinking about the way that you said that the counterspell exhausted him. It did more than exhaust him. Gandalf's words exactly were, "I have met my match and have nearly been destroyed," and this was merely over a door closing, because the Ainur throwing their real power around, the power of their voice, the power of creation, the power to change the world on a metaphysical level, to have that clash like that, it's almost like Melkor clashing with Iluvatar. It's on a smaller scale, and obviously Gandalf is no Iluvatar. He's not even a Loren at this point. He's stuck in this frail body. He can't handle that kind of punishment and that kind of that kind of draining of his powers. And when Legolas says, a Balrog has come," he says, "I should have known, and I am already weary," because he knows what's to come. He knows what he must do. Before we get too deep into this, because we haven't even started our half hour, Matt, I'm going to turn it over to you briefly, because I wanted let's talk about Shire Post, because you sent these coins out, and I put mine down a little while ago, and I'm not sure where on my disc I put it. I was going to hold it up, but I seem to have mislaid it right now. But can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure, real briefly, I sent out some gifts to our team. The Nine, as a lot of you know, the Nine is a group of writers and researchers on Quora. We also meet at this location for our show, the Council of Tolkien. But I sent out a gift for everybody, just to build our own camaraderie as we were formed online. I mean, we have members all over the world, kind of in a way. A lot of us are Americans, but we have in Italy, and I sent these coins out as part of a stamp where you can stamp letters like a seal, the way that they used to in the Dark Ages and in the times of Middle Earth, with the seal. But these come with a stamp, and I'll hold it up here. And I let everybody pick one of the realms that they offer at a place called Shire Post Mint online, shirepost.com, and they make the coin. They have the exclusive license for the Tolkien estate, and the exclusive license to J.L. Martin or J. Martin, who does Game of Thrones, and they make these great coins and stamps. And I'll hold this up. Everyone picked one, and I let everybody pick what realm they wanted. John, you selected Shire.
The Shire was,
and
yeah.
Sid selected Rivendell, and I will let everybody.
Where we are tonight.
We are in Rivendell tonight.
Exactly right. We're Rivendell, right? We're visiting Sid, and I got left with Mordor. It's true. It was the very last one, and here is the way the stamp looks. I'll try to hold it up there. You can kind of
that's you could see the Eye of Sauron there.
And then it's got the rune script, and you just you stamp it, and you stamp a thing and a letter. And I did this to encourage us to write letters to each other with these wax seal things here. You drip them on there, and then you stamp them, just to keep us maybe more in tune with the way letters used to be written, even though we were all assembled online when we brought ourselves together in this format, and we never knew each other before this. And again, this is just an ongoing experiment, but it does take us back to the old days and the old ways in which Tolkien wrote that lore masters would seal their scrolls in printing of black, scarlet, and black. And so this is kind of the sealing kind of thing. And everyone really liked him, and it was really fun to have everybody pick out their own little guy. Now, the end of the story is that I got in touch with Tom, who's the president and CEO out there of Shire Mint Post. He's a huge Tolkien fan. John, I don't think you guys know this, but I'm going to tell you right now. They are the company that printed the Morgoth medallion coins that you see online.
You did tell me this.
They don't have any script or where they came from anymore, because Tolkien Enterprises reached out to them in 2003 and asked them to not sell those, because that emblem and those symbols and things on Morgoth were from the Silmarillion. Now, here's what's interesting. He has them, and he will not sell them, but he is going to be giving me a number of them as a courtesy, because we are now the official lore masters for his company, to help him with any questions that he has or needs for any new engravings or translations or things for any of his future work. And we've been invited as a TED Talks type of expert group to come out and join him at the Shire Festival in Arkansas, which is in West Fork, Arkansas, on September 28th of this year. September 28th, which is just a few days after Bilbo's birthday on the 22nd. And it's from 11 to 5 on Saturday. It's an all-day event. And I know that some of us are going to be there. We're invited there to do a show broadcast from our booth and a platform where we take questions and talk about issues with a little microphone and stuff. And then we can then have our show broadcast for YouTube, and we'll do it from that location. I can tell you that Laurel, LM5, Lore Master 5, as we call her, she's going to be there because it's pretty close to where she lives. I'm going to be there, and John, I don't know if you guys are going to be there, but there is going to be a little contingent of us there. So again, that is September 28th.
Yeah, I wanted to ask about that because you told me about it, and I was like, I knew the company was in Arkansas, and that's pretty far out of my zone there. But when I looked it up online, it said Connecticut, which was strange. And it did say September. Well,
there's a lot of Middle Earth, festivals out there
Yeah.
about that time. It's a late harvest,
Yeah.
beginning of the
I
year
think the
kind of
mistake
thing.
was I think I looked up the wrong one.
I will
Yeah,
be
this
there,
one
and
is
I'll tell
called.
you. I will
Oh
be
yeah, go
there, and I
ahead.
will tell you why. It's my birthday,
Yay!
September 28th. Yeah, I will be
Hey, good.
64 years old that day.
Wow. Just like the
Okay,
song that Ringo
good.
Starr wrote. Um, yeah, I don't know. It's pretty far out of my zone. That's a lot of travel, and I'm not really a traveler, but I will because I don't have accommodations or anything, So I would have to figure that out. If anything, I
Well,
could.
hey John, if you can get there, I'll get the place, and you can stay with me.
Yeah, I mean it's more about the actual like traveling that is an issue for me. If anything, I would try to be there remotely if possible. I would love to do it, but when I was looking it up online, I looked at the wrong one. I thought, well, Connecticut, that would be pretty easy. That's like like a not very far from me. But I'm like, oh my God,
Yeah,
Arkansas, that's that's really far, and I'm no
I,
yeah.
Bilbo.
I say let's get a GoFundMe campaign so we can fly you in, John.
Well, maybe we'll see. I'll have to. It's a I'm a very uh sort of
You're you're a
homebody.
you're a Baggins, not a Tuca.
Yes, I am a Baggins in that sense. But wait, so you're saying we'll get these Morgoth coins then, which I would love to have one of those because they are very very uncommon, and since we're working with them, maybe we can make the Lindon coin happen, the Grey Havens.
Well, he asked me. We got a good discussion about realms that weren't done. Linden was one.
Yeah.
Glittering Caves was one. Fourth Age. We
Oh,
had a
that's a good one.
discussion about. We had a discussion about New Erebor,
What about
and
Moria?
also well, New Khazad-dûm or Khazad-dûm,
Yeah.
obviously. So yeah, those came up. He was really interested in the fact because he said, well, and another one was Rune. The
Hmm.
Easterlings had they didn't have a capital, but they had a general settlement on the lake,
Yeah.
on the southern side of the lake in Rune, and that was kind of their new Dale, if you want to call it that way. It's kind of a general area. And he said, no, we covered the Easterlings by having the of a Harad. And I said, no, those
Harad
are the Southrons.
Harad literally means south.
The Southrons. And he goes,
Yeah.
oh, you're right. We
Yeah.
we never really covered the Easterlings. And I said,
Yeah.
well, so those are my ideas for three or four of them. I won't get into any other discussions because one of them had to do with a very secret project they may be working on related to maybe a coin related to Elendil as the first king of Gondor,
Oh, you did tell me about
as a
that.
way to
Yeah.
yeah, as a
You're giving
possible
away
way to have.
secrets.
Oh yeah, it's going to be cool. But they're
Yeah.
they're they're flirting with a new run of some of the coins that maybe will be helping them with the inscriptions on them. Uh, but we're just going to be at their service. They are really cool. Like I said, they have the exclusive rights to this, and Tom is just a wonderful guy, and they are worth any business that we can bring to them because they're actually making physical things and coins and things from Tolkien's world, and it's just the coolest stuff ever.
It it is currently
And we're
driving me insane that I had this coin sitting here, sitting on the magnet, and was playing with it before we went live, and I set it down, and I can't find it, and it's driving me crazy. Go ahead,
Well, why
Sid.
don't we roll? Why don't we roll ahead and distract you?
Yeah.
Let me pick up on what Matt just said. Um, this is what we hope to be doing. The nine, we are all authors, but we're also an advisory group. If you ever want to know how to write or say something in Elvish, talk to John. Uh, if
That's
you
me.
want to understand the strengths and powers, both physical in dimensions and spiritual in nature of all the beings in all of uh, Middle Earth, from the Song of the Ainur down to Fourth Age, talk to Matt. And if you want, totally wacky guy who thinks he lives in Middle Earth to this day, talk to me.
Okay, because Sid is underselling himself so much, I have to say go to Sid if you have any questions about the spiritual and philosophical relevance of Tolkien.
Thank you.
Because you
And
are
I just
underselling
wanted
yourself.
can we start my half hour now, John?
Oh, I found the coin.
Oh,
My
okay, well, go for it.
it was sitting under my phone. It was really stressing me out that I couldn't find it, but there it is. Mine is from the Shire. It is the design of a willow tree. The camera's not picking it up all that great.
We should take photos of them
I do have
to show
photos.
on
Yeah.
screen. Yeah,
John, you
yeah.
should
Let's do
keep
that
it.
for
You
next
should
one.
keep it. You should keep the coin on the magnet because
It is
that's
on
the
the
best
magnet.
way not to lose it.
It is on the magnet.
Oh, okay. Oh,
Okay. Okay.
What did you
And
think I
actually,
was
why don't-
levitating it when I did this?
I didn't see it.
What? Actually, next time, why don't we actually make the wax seals and show those
Absolutely.
on the show?
Absolutely. By the
And-
way,
Oh yeah.
can I ask a question about the wax seals? Because I have my little wax stick here that I know where to find, and it's sort of a maroon color, and I noticed that the seal that you made for Mordor was black, and that the seal that Laurel showed me was pink, and I don't know what color yours is, Sid, but are they all different colors randomly, or is there a connotation between the color and the realm?
I think
thank
there's
you.
some connection.
Yeah, there is.
Rivendell was white, Mordor was black.
Yeah, exactly. I just got a big packet of them ordered, and I was looking at these 10 different colors, and I'm like, which colors would be the most, I don't know, maybe the best feel, I was thinking, for the realm. You can use any color you want, obviously, but I wanted to give you one so you didn't have to go out and find your own stupid wax stick,
Yeah.
to be able to do your own seals. So I just put that together. But when I was left with black at the end, and I was the one that had Mordor, I'm like, obviously, I'm going to stamp this stuff in black. And
Black
the white
is
one went
mightier still.
well, the white one obviously went to Sid, and because Laura's our only female member of our
Is
of
that
our team,
why you gave her pink?
Yeah, she got pink, and she loves horses so much. And I was like, I didn't have any colors that I didn't have any colors. She can go get any color she wants. I don't care.
That's too funny.
But
because I saw it and I was like,
green would
because I saw yours was black and I showed hers. I'm like, oh, they're all different colors. Okay, so you picked the colors. It didn't come specifically with each coin. That yeah. Okay, I understand.
No, I just kind of lined it up whichever, because I only had 10 choices of colors, so I was just trying to do the best I could with what I had at the time. And there was some really funny comment came from Dutch, though. He got my letter stamped from Mordor with that seal on it on the envelope, and it had his name in runes on the letter, like everyone's came with runes. And he said he turned it over and looked at the stamp from Mordor pressed onto the back of the envelope. And he said he looked at it for 10 seconds and didn't know if he wanted to open it or not.
Well, you were there when I opened it up on stream. I was very careful to preserve the seals. I didn't want to break them. I want to keep them,
That's pretty cool.
But let's get to our first half-hour segment, which is going to be Sid. Now, you told me what you were up to here, but Matt's in the dark, so I'm actually going to do this slightly differently. For the introduction, we're going to set a 3-minute limit for introduction before we get to the half-hour discussion. So go ahead. I'm setting you up right now. Sid, go ahead and introduce what we're doing.
First of all, something absolutely funny. Matt, you managed to make me feel old tonight because you said in medieval times when we used wax seals, and I actually had a wax seal as a child. So now I know just how old I am. And I want to focus on July 4th, on Independence Day, and ask a sincere question. I want to be very careful. The question is simple and clear. I want to be careful how we frame it to have a good discussion. As far as I know, the only person who ever used the term the free peoples of Middle-earth was Gandalf. He certainly said it most. That is how he described all of the good folk represented at the Council of Elrond and all of the good folk who in any way defended themselves against or participated in the War of the Ring. And my question tonight is, what does it mean to be one of the free folk? Whether as individuals, what does it mean to be for our species or our community or our nation to be one of the free folk in this world today, as we learn and understand it from Gandalf? What is the true spiritual and healthy nature of independence? But before we go there, I just want to say, John, you've answered a long question. Do elves have pointy ears? No, elves have pink glowing ears. You're showing us that. But in any case, and I want to be careful. I do want each listener to personally think about the state of whatever country you're in the world on this question, but let us not make analogies to the present day with each other. But what do we learn about living as a free person, growing in independence in healthy ways that we can bring to our lives, our nations, and our world on this Independence Day from the wisdom of Gandalf? That's my question for tonight.
And you have you just about used up that intro time. I just want to, before we even get into the discussion, we're using up the last 30 seconds here. Gandalf is not the one that said free peoples. Elrond said it.
My bad.
Elrond, and the other character that said it, which is very interesting, is Treebeard actually said the free peoples when he did his poem that introduced all of the different creatures that walk upon Middle-earth, and he started with the free peoples, the elves, the dwarves, the Ents, and the men, and then by the urging of his new hobbit friends, he added a line for the hobbits as well.
Thank you for correcting me.
Okay, so that time means that we are going to... I'm sure you heard the beep, or maybe you didn't, I don't know. Oh, not 3 hours, that would be terrible. So let's start the discussion...
It would be great.
now. The test begins now. If you get the reference, make a comment. Yeah, I mean, for me, I think we had a discussion about this, not super recently, Sid, but you asked me what free peoples of Middle-earth means to me, and like who are the free peoples and who are not, and my interpretation was that they had free will, that these were the people with real souls who had real choices that would affect not only themselves but those around them, and that they had real life, like the dwarves had real life after Iluvatar breathed it into them, like the men were born that way and the elves were born that way. And if we're to understand Treebeard, so were the Ents, because he counts them among the free peoples, the hobbits as well. That's my personal interpretation of it. Tolkien in his letters tends to go towards they're the people who oppose the Dark Lord, or whoever the Dark Lord may be. And I think when you look at the opposition, it's really the same answer, is that we're looking at, it's not just a war between light and dark, between white and black, between good and evil. It's a war between predetermination and free will.
Yeah, but what does that mean when we say there were people of the race of men, to use Tolkien's language, living enslaved near the Sea of Nirnan in Mordor, called to war as vassals of Sauron from the south and the east? I don't think, as the term is used actively in the novel, that they would be considered among the free peoples. They are the peoples who, in spite of their nature to be free, and yes, I'm thinking about the Declaration of Independence right now, are not free. And so there's some inner and also social political act of courage to preserve one's freedom in obviously a time of war or any type of oppression, and to make ourselves free and keep ourselves free from inner and outer oppression, from Frodo growing in courage to the point where he can bear the ring when he couldn't stand up to Old Man Willow until he met Tom and Goldberry, and then after that he could stand up to a Barrow-wight, and on until he could stand up to the ring to take it all the way to Mordor.
The Nazgul as
and
well.
and the Nazgul as well. So there's some inner quality of courage and some even greater quality of not being tempted. Well, Gandalf not being knowing he would be tempted and preventing it, and Aragorn, as far as we can tell, having already gotten past the temptation of the ring before the novel and the year of the War of the Ring began. So, what is that freedom? What is that independence of spirit that Feyre all should have, but some of us lose? And how do we keep it? That's a big
Yeah.
question for half an hour.
I think the way we lose it is through through the darkness, is through entities like Morgoth or Sauron, or I mean even down to petty evil like Smaug or Saruman. The hobbits, some of them lost their freedom, and then they found the courage to regain it through the influence of those who had gone against much greater evil, of course.
Mm-hmm.
I think we should hear from Matt
Yeah.
because he hasn't spoken in a while.
Well, I'm listening to you guys. I agree with everything you're saying. Like is often the case with us three. I agree with all that. I just my mind centers around the concepts of not being forced to serve, or serving by force, or the abuse of a tyrant. The second one for me would be um, the freedom and the peace of knowing you're not going to be invaded at any moment. When King Elisar, who's Aragorn, became the king of the reunited kingdom of Arnor and Gondor, none of the peoples of Middle Earth were they knew who he was or came to find out who he was, but none of them were afraid of having to be taxed by him or serve him or be invaded by his forces. They knew now that they were going to be basically left at peace and they were going to have their own realms. Gondor Gon was given his place of peace, and so was Fanghorn, and so was obviously the Old Forest, and Tom Bombadil probably. Well, he can manage himself, as we all know. But I mean, these places were left alone finally after all these, millennia of threat from Morgoth and from Sauron. So the absence of threat and the absence of fear and the absence of danger, the absence of trepidation about living from one day to the next is what real freedom really is. It allows you to be who you want to be in your own person. It allows you to live in the society that you want to live in with the people that you're living with, to be their own culture and not be forced or exterminated or interbred with by force or something. As we all know, the dark forces did for a lot of the history of Middle Earth, and so that just seems to be what freedom really is to me, as it applies to me as an American and us as Americans, and also the free peoples of Middle Earth. So that's how I time together myself.
I really like that, but as I listened, I started to expand the list.
There's more. Yeah.
There are two more. There are two more at least. Um, we need to be free. We need to be free of deception and trickery. The combination of Saruman's lies and the power of his voice. And we also need to be free of temptation and greed. So Bill Ferny or
Thorin Oakenshield.
Thorin Oakenshield. Well, that's free of desire for the Arkenstone.
But it wasn't just. It was also not wanting to share. It was hoarding.
So inner greed.
Yeah.
But I think Bill Ferny was bought off.
Oh, of course, yeah, he was bought and paid for
by the half orc, the half Uruk Southerners who came in, and also, of course, the miller's son, and Lotho.
Yeah, and the sheriffs with their feathered caps,
Yeah, there had to be some. There also has to be some element of truth is part of freedom and independence, and falsehood, and also not only and as well as force and the threat of force.
I
I think
wanted
all of
to
those come into being unfree.
I wanted to go back to some stuff that Matt was saying specifically about Aragorn because I thought it was very good to touch on what he did as a king. Because if you think about it from the random perspective of Joe Nobody in Middle Earth who has nothing to do with the war, it seems that all of a sudden at the end of the story that Aragorn sort of takes over the world, you know, that he becomes the king of most of Middle Earth, of Eriador, and which contains, of course, you know, the lost kingdom of Arnor, and Gondor and Umbar as well, and you know, and even, you know, Mordor even. And if we look at the way that Aragorn, he's so determined to not be a tyrant that even before he is the king, he will not enter the city of Minas Tirith except as a healer. He's not willing to come in yet, but he's only brought in because he's basically a doctor and they need him. And you look at his acts as king, and it's all about establishing freedoms. He doesn't reabsorb Rohan. He keeps it sovereign the way it has been since Cirion and Eorl made their sacred pact. He not only declares that the Shire will be a free land, but he gives them more land. He gives them West March, and he gives them Buckland. He says Mordor is free. He gives it to the people of Nirn, and he lets all of the enemies of Gondor who were not going to attack him live there in peace. And a discussion came up on Quora, this actually just happened yesterday, specifically about Bree. Because Bree is one of the most fascinating and interesting communities in all of Eriador because it has no government. It has no king, no mayor, no master, no council, no village elders, nothing like that. And a few people in the comments when I was speaking about this brought up that Barlaam Butterbur, as the innkeeper, is sort of the most important guy in town and the closest thing that they have to any sort of leadership. And in a discussion with Gandalf towards the end of the story, he keeps hearing about the king, and he says, will he leave us alone? And Gandalf says, of course he will leave you alone. He says, your beer is very good, by the way. And he's like, he's been here? What are you talking about? And he's like, have you not put it together that the king is Aragorn, Strider as you knew him? And he's just sort of like baffled that the king had been hanging out in his, not only hanging out in his tavern, but that he distrusted him. He thought he was this sort of nefarious character, and now he was the king. And he said, and he was giving him compliments and telling him, no, Bree can continue living on as it was, as this wonderful little mixed community of men and halflings that is not seen anywhere else. And as the Shire becomes even more insular due to what Saruman did to them, there was still this land where Aragorn could meet his friends and where hobbits and men could live together. So, you know, Aragorn, even though he's basically taking over the world, is all about freedom.
And isn't there a foreshadowing of that in the way Bombadil always behaves in the Old Forest? Mm-hmm. He lets Old Man Willow be Old Man Willow as long as he's not hurting anyone else. He doesn't go in and clean out even the Barrow Wights. He can, obviously. He lets everything be exactly as it is, as long as for any creature who lets everyone else be exactly who they are. Mm-hmm. So this gets into the topic of rightful leadership. And I have a belief that when Tolkien writes about magic in the good sense, the magic of the Valar, the Ainur serving in Valinor or under the Valar, and the elves of Aman, that we know that is called subcreation. But I think subcreation has two meanings. And this is, if you want to read more on this, read On Fairy Stories and Leaf by Nigel, the companion story to the essay on fairy stories, that magic represents the highest of human creativities, which Tolkien called subcreation, and these days a lot of people call it co-creativity or co-creation, where in harmony with the good we create. But it's not only about, you know, writing stories and building all of the myth and legends and history of Middle Earth. it's also about leadership in this world. Pick one, Doctors Without Borders, whatever. Anywhere people go and serve in opposition to, I won't say against, but in opposition to tyranny, and bring good governance and health and nourishment and hope to people, genuine, realistic hope. I think that is the true magic of creation. That's what Tolkien work is all about. And growing in that, can be as an artist and can be as a writer, obviously, and can also be, as Aragorn was, a leader, or as Lao Tzu and Tom Bombadil were just a guy who sits out in the wilderness and does his own thing.
An interesting thought I had while you were speaking there is that in The Hobbit specifically, there's this interesting sort of dichotomy of Esgaroth having this elected leader, the master they called him, really behaved like a mayor, who was a very corrupt politician who wound up stealing money and going off into the wilderness and dying of starvation. But what's interesting is that the master, he's the leader of Esgaroth, and after Bard slays the dragon, the people are kind of fed up with this master, and they wish for Bard to be their king. And we see this theme a lot in Tolkien's work of the fact that kings are chosen by the people. But what's interesting here is that even though we see it with Aragorn, we see it with Gil-galad, we see it with many kings just being adopted by their leaders, all the way back to Elu-Thingol, all the way back to Ingwa, I would say, that the kings are chosen by the people. But in this instance, the master says that he was elected by them, and that if Bard wants to go and be a king, he could go to Dale and be a king there. But and Bard respects this. He doesn't try to take advantage of the situation and take over Esgaroth and install himself as the king, because even though the master is a completely corrupt and nefarious individual, he's also correct in saying that that there's an election cycle and that he was chosen, and that if they don't want him anymore, they could vote him out. Of course, he didn't make it to the next election cycle. And we see that there is democracy in Middle Earth. We see it in the Shire, most specifically with we have the dynastic Thane, but we also have the duly elected mayor of Michel Delving, which Samwise becomes the mayor for 49 years, completely unprecedented in history. And that was after Frodo even had served a small amount of time as a deputy mayor. So we see that Tolkien, even though he romanticizes the ideas of kings and kingdoms, he does not romanticize small tyranny or bullying or sort of being in charge simply because you were born to a certain set of parents. You had to earn it.
Yeah, and this is, when we look at the title of the book, The Return of the King, Tolkien, for the most part, he looked at the Arthurian legends in their original Celtic form, in the Mabinogion and such, and didn't like the French at all. But within this one element of the return of the rightful king, he did pick up on the French versions of the Arthurian legends, and but the rightful king, some people very mistakenly, I would say, think that Tolkien's is representing conservatism and possibly a royalist leaning. But if you look at his contemporary thinking, he did not see the kings of England and the British Empire as rightful.
No, you're right. He did not like imperialism at all.
Yeah, and when you look at World War II, he compared the Nazis to Sauron and Mordor, but all the other nations to Saruman in one version or another. He actually spoke of nuclear weapons as what would have happened if Sauron had gotten the ring,
or the devices of orcs.
Yeah, no, but the Hiroshima bomb he specifically referred to as the equivalent of Saruman getting a hold of the One Ring.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's a
Just
very humbling thing as as an American teenager,
Yeah.
admiring Tolkien as I was, to really make me step back and say, what is what is righteous here?
Okay, I'm
That
holding up
was
my hand
tough.
because Matt is trying to get a word in.
uh, yeah, on this, I wanted to inject one thing. He was he believed that the king and queen of England were rightful, that they were in the modern age becoming unjust. He wasn't challenging necessarily their rightful place to be on the throne, just that they were imperialistic and they were abusing other people's rights. We're
Yeah.
sitting here talking about this on Independence Day, and you know, a lot of people in the world don't really realize or want to realize how crazy and how brutal the King George III was and his ministers towards the United States in those last 40 years leading up to independence. And so yeah, I just wanted to say that's what I kind of
Yeah.
think in my reading of Tolkien.
Yeah, I think he was okay with the idea of England having a king, but not the idea of England's king being the king of other nations. That is
Yeah.
what bothered, and especially considering his birth and the first like 3 or 4 years of his life being in South Africa, that has to have colored that
Yes.
somewhat as well.
Yes.
But
Exactly.
also
Exactly.
even with that, an incredibly strong sense of noblesse oblige, that those who, however they get it, whether elected or inherited or by some other means, end up ruling,
Hmm.
have a tremendous responsibility to truly subcreate um, a righteous land for everyone, where everyone is free, and that we, therefore, as people who vote, have a tremendous responsibility to choose who our leaders will be on the question: will we be a free nation of free peoples, creating a free world of free peoples with the leaders we choose? And when I say we now, I'm not just speaking about the United States, but
The world,
also
the free
the
world,
world.
as they
And
would say.
no, I'm going to say even the nations that have already fallen
Hmm.
to tyranny and despotism need to find ways to free themselves. Look at how wonderful it is that Germany was the most liberal nation in the world in the 1920s, slipped up a bit, shall we say politely, and then
Some bad
recovered.
things happened, yeah, and then they did recover. It's true. It is true. Um, you said something earlier about the matter of Britain and Tolkien's preference for the Celtic lore and not so much the French lore. But what is interesting, and not a lot of people pick up on this because you can buy it and you could read it, but it is so not complete. But in the early 50s, and writing The Lord of the Rings sort of put a kibosh on this, he was working on his own translation of The Fall of Arthur, which is the French legend. And I would have loved to visit that alternate world where maybe The Lord of the Rings came out later in the 60s and he finished The Fall of Arthur. Because if it was anything as wonderful as his take on The Green Knight, I would have loved to have read the entirety of it.
In my
Well,
alternate
just to be
world,
clear, that
as a quickie, in my alternate world, Tolkien's an elf. He's still with us.
I was going to say that I don't think that the opposition to anything French is because he's a Francophile or against the French in any way. Because as he's writing his works, we all know, and we all have accepted his words, where he says he's trying to really write a unified history of the British people, which is Anglo-Saxon, um, in Dane, Viking. I mean, it's really it's just got so much more of the Northern European Celtic Viking blood into it than French, and so
Yeah.
I think he's defaulting towards that than going too heavily
Well,
in the direction of France.
I think you're
Yeah,
misinterpreting a little bit of what Sid said. Was not so much that I mean, he did have like a whole cheeky thing about France, like any British person does, because that's just the way that that England and France has always been towards each other. They kind of thumb their nose at each other in this like soccer rivalry sort of fashion. Do they really hate each other? No, of course they do not, but they love to razz on each other like tortured siblings. But what Sid was talking about was that specifically in the matter of Britain, that he preferred, he didn't prefer the French interpretations of Arthur, and that's really all it was. He didn't set out. A lot of people say this is one of the most repeated things in Quora that I always have to step in and say, no, he didn't say this. He didn't say that he wanted to create a British history or a British mythology. He said he wanted to create a mythology and dedicate it to England, and that he wanted it to have the feel that he called Celtic, although his understanding of what Celtic was and the modern understanding of what Celtic was were two different things. And this was in a very depressing letter he wrote, where he said his crest had fallen because they wouldn't publish the Silmarillion at the time, that he wanted to dedicate it to England, not that he wanted it to be English mythology, which I think is a fanciful interpretation of what he said.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with that too.
I agree, and I'd like to take it 2 steps further. One is his distinction, I'm very confident, was not national or nationalistic. It was linguistic. So the language, people often say, why didn't Tolkien like this writer or that writer? And I often say, well, because they wrote in modern English. And Tolkien stopped reading anything after Beowulf. He was a scholar of Old English, the Nordic languages, ancient German, and the Celtic lore. And he only read things in the original. And I don't even know if he knew medieval French, but his bias was towards the Germanic
fluent,
and Celtic branches.
He studied it.
His bias was towards the Germanic and Celtic branches of Indo-European, and not the Latinate ones, including they're what we call the Romance languages, and that's where the divide really was.
And he had a love for the culture behind the Romance languages. It just wasn't his forte. Like, he spent a lot of time in Italy, which he called Gondor.
I had not known that. That's
cool. It was in a letter to he was speaking about his family, and he was talking about where his son was, because I think the fan was a young girl who had asked specifically about Christopher, who was in the service at that time, and he said that he was in Africa at the time, and that he had been spending time in Gondor, and then in parentheses he wrote Italy.
Oh, wonderful!
That's really funny you say that, because Nicolo Andrion, who was on our LM8, he chose Gondor. He's in Italy.
I remember when you told me that, I said that's perfect, because if you take a map of modern Europe and you line it up against a map of Middle Earth in the Third Age, and you match Hobbiton with Oxford, and there's a volcano in Croatia that you line that up with Mount Doom, Minas Tirith is right in the middle of Italy.
Yeah.
And it matches up really well. Like, the Mirkwood is a much, much larger version of the Black Forest in Germany.
Hey, you want to hear something interesting about that alignment on maps?
Mm-hmm.
I did a study a while ago, wrote an article about it, that Utumno is located at the very center of Copenhagen.
Interesting.
Wait, are you talking about Utumno, the Morgoth's fortress? Because
when you line the maps up,
I think we have to put an asterisk on that, because Tolkien never drew a map that included Utumno. He said it was in the north, but there was never a definitive. There was never an official map that showed it.
I agree. That's why I did the research on it and did measurements on a map and made an alignment, bearing lines. I was in the Navy for a lot of years, as you know. I did a bearing line adjustment based on Italy in Gondor and Oxford in the Shire, and went north by that angle on the compass by a certain number of miles based on other waypoint references, and it put Utumno in right exactly in Copenhagen.
It's interesting.
We all agree. We trust Matt when he starts
Yeah.
to measure things.
Well, of
But
course.
there's
Well,
also,
I
yeah.
don't doubt his cartography or navigational
Yeah, but you
skills. I
said
just
there wasn't a math in Tolkien's day.
yeah,
Is all you're saying.
I just don't think that I don't think we know where Autumno was on the map.
But well, I'll trust that if anyone knows, it's Matt.
Yeah.
But I want to bring in something interesting here that brings us back to the
Two
whole
2 minutes, by the way.
2 minutes. This is a great place to close up on. There in the Arthurian legends, there's a forest that you can walk into, cross, and end up in Rome.
Mm-hmm.
And that happened because it was from the French versions, which you can actually walk from Paris to Rome. But when it came back to England under Mallory, all of a sudden you had this forest that would magically cross the English Channel, and it became a magical forest that took you from one world to the other, which in The Lord of the Rings was called the Old Forest, that took you out of the land of the little people, very English-style
Yes.
little people,
Yes.
into the larger world of many nations.
And
And that actually becomes a psychological and psychospiritual journey through Jungian interpretation of
and
what
if you
it
want to
means
go
to be elevated in spirit.
a little bit more literal, Eriador in the First Age was covered by forest, so you could walk to Rome through a forest in the First Age.
Absolutely, yeah.
Matt,
And there's a mention in Lord of
seconds.
the Rings that the Old Forest and Fangorn
we're once part of the
all
whole.
one.
Yeah. With 30 seconds left, let Matt have the final word here.
Oh, well, I thought your topic was great, Sid, and I hope you got what you wanted out of it, and I think it's great. I wanted to just close with the location of Angband. I had pegged, based on that study, went this proper direction out by mileage and angle on the compass, is a mountain called Jaruskaya,
Is that in
which
Iceland?
is in Belarus.
Oh, Belarus.
It's in Belarus.
How does
Belarus. It's the same. That mountain,
That
that
doesn't-
exact location is the bearing line and mileage distance from Autumno east, and it landed exactly in the middle of this mountain.
we're out of time on that, but I find that confusing, Matt. I think I need you to explain it a little more, because if we're going by the Shire being England, Angband is far, far to the northwest of the Shire. It's north of Beleriand. So I don't know how we get to Belarus, which is to the east of England.
It is to the east, but it's not as east as you think. It's north. It's north and
No,
east.
I get that, but I'm saying that Angband from the Shire, from Eriador, is north and west because it was above Beleriand. It was near Hithlum.
Are you?
I'm going to suggest we table this to next month,
Yeah.
and maybe
Yeah.
the three of us can have a
Yeah,
private
I think you know what.
discussion.
I'll call you at some point because because I have my Beleriand map here, and it's cut off where Angband would be. But if you think about the Balrogs coming from to Lambeth, they passed over Hithlum. It gives you a general sense of Angband being above Beleriand, so far to the west of the Shire. I would have thought that it would have been like Iceland or something.
I don't know if we can work this out because we're still not sure whether in those days the world was round or flat.
That's true as well, because there were lands that were when he broke the world and created it as a sphere or recreated it. There were lands that were destroyed and lands that were created. So Matt, actually, you're the next person to bring up a topic, and I have no inkling of what you're going to bring up. I'm going to set you up for 3 minutes to intro what you're going to talk about or what we're going to talk about by your direction. So go ahead now.
Okay. Today I want to talk about and fully flesh out the King of the Dead and the Undead Army.
Okay.
And the reason I want to talk about it as a little bit of an intro is I think there's a lot of canon misperception about what is actual factual canon based on what Legolas says about the undead army and the horns that he hears and the weapons that he sees the weapons that are being pulled from scabbards, and the physical nature of not only the undead army, but also what kind of damage they can do based on the body that they found up against the wall that had two broken legs. So there's a physical aspect to, how did the Corsairs get killed? There's an idea that they were killed by fear, which would make that army more powerful than any army in fantasy fiction if they were able to kill all the Corsairs with nothing but fear. But we have this other evidence of physical damage being done and horns being blown. And so I want to talk about that and try to come to some, maybe not a total agreement, although we might have an agreement, but some kind of general consensus on where most of the canon support lies for some kind of relative conclusion.
I'd like to bring in
Okay,
one
wait,
third
hold on.
possibility.
Hold on. We're still in the intro phase here. Are you done, Matt?
Right.
Okay, let me
Yeah.
cut that off, and we'll set it to 30 minutes. And Sid, you already started, so you're going to go ahead. I have something to say as well, but let's go ahead. We're starting at 30 minutes right now.
Okay. I always took the killed by fear for the Corsairs is they were on boats in a river wearing armor. And they wouldn't have died of some mystical fear if they'd been on dry land. But when you jump into the Anduin in full body armor because you're scared crapless, you drown. So I didn't take it as the kind of magical fear death that you're talking about.
No,
I
not
took it as
even
a very practical fear death. Nowhere to run,
Yeah.
only a place to drown.
To add to what you said, Sid, not only not a river though, but the bay of Belfalos,
Right.
And that would probably be very deep because I am agreeing, by the way, with Matt that the dead army can fight. They can do physical damage. We saw that with the remnants of the Rohirrim that had tried to get in there. We saw, like you said, the guy with the broken bones. That he didn't just break his own legs. But in this case, what I see it as, they almost like what the Nazgul do, where they're so overcome by fear that they jumped into the bay, and you said they're wearing armor, they're not going to be able to swim. They jumped into the bay, they drowned, they slew each other, they slew themselves, and also they're freeing the slaves on board these ship who are having an uprising as well. And I'm sure that these men joined forces with not only the dead men of Dunharrow, but Aragorn and Elrond's sons and all the Dunedain that were with them, and Gimli and Legolas and that fellow's name who I can't remember right now, who died in the Battle of Pelennor Fields. He was there as well. I think that it was complete mayhem, and that they had no discipline or they were training or anything. They just went to basically lizard brain and freaked out, and that's how they were killed. But that's not, and then, like you said, that does make them very powerful, though, Matt. And they could have done real physical damage, but I think they didn't need to, and that makes them even scarier.
And you're thinking of Halbarad. Right?
Halbarad, yes, that's his name.
Yeah. And one
I
thought
don't
about
disagree.
that. And then, a very short thought, and then I'll give it to you, Matt. There's actually one specific piece of textual support for your view, John, which says that once or as they were winning, one Dunedain chieftain was assigned to captain each of the major ships. And that's how they could restore order and keep the former slaves from being terrified of the army of the dead as well. And Matt, that on to you.
Oh, I appreciate that, and this is going to help, I think, get us to some kind of general consensus goal here. In order to free them, slaves on board, they would have had to have a physical aspect in the first plane. That's number one. And two, the idea that they're nothing but phantoms is a misnomer out there, that they were nothing but a phantom apparition that created fear. Now, I agree with John and you that a lot of these people, according to the general context of this last of this battle against the Corsairs is that some of them were afraid. I don't think they were petrified and killed on the spot, but I think a lot of them did were in a panic. A lot of them jumped overboard. I agree with that part of it. I just don't believe that the passages or the logic of all the passages in combination indicate that every single Corsair was killed by fear and jumping off their boats. I think that some of them were killed in the physical sense, the same way that the Rohirrim soldier was found in the Paths of the Dead. And so I think there's a combination of both. In other words, fear and, yes, they are physical. They are not just phantom form.
I think that, yeah, absolutely some of the Corsairs were bodily slain. We don't know if that was the dead men of Dunharrow or if it was Aragorn, Halbarad, Gimli, Legolas, Elladan, Elrohir, and about 30 Dunedain as well. There were a lot of people.
Well, that's kind of my point. That's true, but I mean, if you think in terms of the Corsair fleet being an element of Sauron's attack, I'm not going to put a number on this, but let's just say it's several thousand. There's no way those 30 guys at the most are going to kill these 5,000, 6,000 kind of guys without the undead army actually doing the bulk of the work.
It wasn't just them. They had the dead men with them as well. I'm saying that they're absolutely physical, right. But I think that the majority of these men wound up in the bay. I think that I'm trying to find the exact chapter here. I have the Return of the King, and it's proving to be a little annoying to try and find it.
While you're doing that, let me. Yeah. I want to raise two questions that you guys are more into the specific parts of the book. Two things that puzzle me, and I want to ask about on this. One is there's a story told in Rohan before we even know that Aragorn's going to walk the paths of the dead, that I think it was a king or a son of the king many generations before Theoden, back in the second lineage, who got drunk and swore to try the paths of the dead. And I always thought that it wasn't just a warrior of Rohan, but it was a king or crown prince of Rohan who they found, bringing an end to that legend, like whatever happened to him. The name Brago's coming to mind, though I may have that wrong.
That was Brago.
I don't think he was a prince, but he was a warrior chieftain of the Rohirrim.
Okay, and the other is there's a message in all of this. Somehow, the magic of Isildur and swearing an oath to Isildur and betraying it created these undead, and that speaks to just how dangerous, even among good people, a sworn oath can be. And they can leave undead running around. I think we have to talk about that some because
Sid, you hit on something that I just wrote about recently, because somebody asked me, did Isildur deny the men of Dunharrow the gift of man by holding them to their oath? And I said, no, he does not have that power. It was Iluvatar that held them to their oath, because that's who they made the oath to.
Ah, yes, that makes sense. Very dangerous to make an oath to Iluvatar, guys.
Yeah, somebody in the comments. Somebody in the comments, because I featured this on YouTube and on one of my videos, and they left it. They said that Iluvatar says, "Do not take my name in vain."
Gee, who else has said that?
Yeah, exactly, Iluvatar, the same guy, right? All right, I need to search my digital copy because I'm having a difficult time with the physical one. Specifically about the dead men.
Do you have any thoughts about what happened with the oath, or even what, since you're into the physical side, what was the Stone of Eric?
The Stone of Eric was almost certainly a meteor that was brought from Numenor. I had a whole discussion with Laurel about this once.
But wasn't it spherical?
Yeah, that's right.
A meteor. There's no such thing as a spherical meteor.
Oh, absolutely. When it burns through the atmosphere, it gets very, very smooth. Meteorite would be the proper term.
I own 2 meteorites, and I've looked at a lot of them in museums, and they sure don't come out to
No.
be a ball.
Well, they
So
can.
there's something
I,
magic
I
going on.
I think it could have been shaped too. I think that it was a similar sort of black meteoric, like what not Glamdring, but Gurthang might have been made out of.
Yeah, the Numenorians had the abilities that rival the dwarves as far as metallurgy and making globes and orbs out of that, and that's what. And you're correct. That's what happened. It was a meteorite that was smoothed over to be very round.
Hmm.
Mhm.
So I just
Um,
globe-shaped objects
Mhm.
include the Seeing Stones of Feanor and the great
One of which was a large
Stone of
black stone as well. Yeah, because Laurel asked me specifically about the Stone of Eric and what its significance was, and through my research, all I can find is that it was from Numenor, and that it was considered culturally
hey,
significant.
John answered your question. Is it's in Ride of the Rohirrim, chapter 9.
That's where I was looking. I don't know why I couldn't quite get that.
It's in the lead. It's in the lead pages coming up to why they were so afraid for Aragorn to actually go in there, and so it's kind of early on in that chapter. It talks about the history of that as a little bit of a foreshadowing, but
See, but
pretty soon you're going to see why.
I mean, it starts with Merry is the problem.
Right.
Yeah.
It's hard to
And
find.
that's not. It's also not. It's
like,
also not chapter 9. I don't know where you're getting that
well, the Army of the Dead.
Chapter
let's
9
see
is
here.
the last debate. Chapter 5 is the Ride of the Rohirrim, and it follows Merry and Theoden as they talk to Ganburigan on their way over to
I'm sorry,
Gondor.
you're right.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, you're right. I have it here as book 5, but it's chapter 5.
It is. Yeah, book 5, chapter 5. That's correct. I mean, before that is the Siege of Gondor, and before that is.
So they talk about it there, and the nature of the question is, it's hard to parse passage by Legolas. Legolas, who has this termitation of he doesn't know very much. He's in universe. He doesn't have what we know as readers or experts in this field from letters. The letter that has to do with this most closely is letter 156 from Tolkien. We have other passages that talk about what's going on with the not only with ring wraiths but also the Army of the Dead. Kind of how the middle plane or beings that are stuck in the second plane can affect physical objects or even physical people in the first plane, or both planes, because they both exist in both spiritually. But there's just this interesting thing that harkens back to last week or last month when we were talking about the nature of canon passages. People assume that if Legolas says something, which he does, he talks about them, that's a canon, knowledgeable, knowing interpretation of that they only needed fear anymore to do what they were doing. And the connotation really is that they used fear to keep people out of the paths of the dead, to keep people away from the Dimhold. And that's all true. But this after 40, 50 years now, this perception persists that that all these people were just killed by fear by phantom ghosts.
I don't think anybody thinks that. I don't think anybody thinks that, though.
Yeah, look at the thread on my last couple of posts on this in the last 2 or 3 weeks.
Well, I don't know. Maybe you get some Hilarios in there that might think along that way, but let me. I found it actually, and you're gonna think this is very funny, because it actually is in chapter 9. But it's the last debate. So, because I was reading it and I was like a little bit, I know the chronology, but looking at the actual book, it follows Aragorn through the Pass of the Dead. And Sid, I'm getting that echo all of a sudden. I don't know what's going on all of a sudden.
I'll
That's
switch.
Strange.
Oh, fireworks started outside my door.
Oh, okay.
I'll put myself on finger mute.
Okay, cool. So it follows them, and all the people that live in that area between the Paths of the Dead and the Bay of Belfalas are sort of getting out of the way because of the fear and the army of the dead. And it sort of just ends there. And we don't get that scene of Aragorn and all of them at the Bay of Belfalos. It cuts to Merry, it cuts to Pippin, it cuts to Gandalf. And then it's not until afterwards that Aragorn tells the story of what happened. And it's in that chapter, the last debate. And I'm going to read exactly what it said. But here it is. This is Gimli telling the story. For my part, I heeded them not, said Gimli, for we came upon them at last upon battle in earnest. There at Pelargr lay the main fleet of Umbar, 50 great ships and smaller vessels beyond count. Many of those that we pursued had reached the havens before us, and brought their fear with them, and some of the ships had put off, seeking an escape down the river or to reach the far shore, and many of the smaller craft were ablaze. But the Haradrim, being now driven to the brink, turned at bay, and they were fierce in despair, and they laughed when they looked at us, for they were a great army still. But Aragorn halted and cried with a great voice, Now come, by the black stone I call you. And suddenly the shadow host that had hung back at last came up like a grey tide, sweeping all away before it. Faint cries I heard, and dim horns blowing, and a murmur as of countless far voices. It was like the echo of some forgotten battle of the dark years long ago. Pale swords were drawn, but I know not whether their blades would still bite, for the dead needed no longer any weapon but fear. None would withstand them. To every ship they came that was drawn up, and then they passed over the water to those that were anchored, and all the mariners were filled with a madness of terror, and leaped overboard, save the slaves chained to the oars. Reckless we rowed among our fleeing foes, driving them like leaves, until we came to the shore. And then to each the great ships that remained Aragorn sent one of the Dunedain, and they comforted the captives that were aboard, and bade them put aside their fear and be free. So I think that they definitely have the physical ability. Gimli doesn't know whether they have the physical ability to fight. I think that you proved it in stating like the corpses in the halls of the dead. Like I said, they didn't break their legs on their own, but they didn't need it in this battle. That's not to say they couldn't fight, that they couldn't do great damage. But in this, it's saying they needed no weapon but fear, and they all leapt overboard. And to think about 50 ships, and then 50 large ships, and then countless smaller ones, this is a lot of people that wound up in that bay. Nobody's fishing there anytime soon.
Well, yeah, no, I think just to say something real quick before Sid jumps in, I would just say that I don't contest that at all. I just think that once they got on board, that once they killed the first 10 to 20 of these guys, just the specter of them and the knowledge that they're actually killing people from the dead realm was probably enough at that point to make a lot of them jump overboard. I'm not contesting that both of those things happen. I'm just saying that both of those things happened.
Hi, can you guys hear me now?
Yes.
Good. I was looking at the other end of the research. Eorl, Brago, Baldur. Baldur was the heir apparent to King Brago's son of King Eorl, the first king of the Rohirrim in Rohan. And it was he who got drunk and swore an oath to go on the paths of the dead and never came back. I believe he was king for a very short time because he is on the lineage of kings.
And I believe in one of the letters, Tolkien did in fact say that was his body that was found in the Paths of the Dead.
Okay. Good.
Which is a wonderful example of what I love that Tolkien does. He ties up every thread. Mm-hmm. And the way we've been jumping around, this is scattered across, 2 books, because some of it is in Two Towers, and some of it is in, and also in books 5 and 6 within Return of the King. Yet no thread is ever broken. And I once did an entire reading of The Lord of the Rings just to trace every single character arc. And you've got character arcs of people who died
Mm-hmm.
20 generations back.
Yes,
Like
you do see it.
Balthor.
How
And then you find his body.
and I mean, and just have you seen the images from the new movie that's coming out this Christmas, Sid?
No, I haven't.
They're making an animated feature called the War of the Rohirrim about Helm Hammerhand and his children. And they showed the images. I showed them to Matt. It's very anime inspired, and I'm thinking of how that story is told in the appendix of the Lord of the Rings, and we get this whole arc of Helm Hammerhand and what he was like as a person, and where he started and where he ended up. And he's not even in the main narrative. He died many years ago. And Brian Cox is playing him. We actually have 10 minutes left for this.
Okay, I'd like to reserve the last 10 minutes for segueing what we just talked about into another issue that's come up. I mean, we've talked about it in our writing before, but for the good of this little section, I want to transfer this, what I think is a little bit of a harmony on the undead army, to what would happen if Gollum had decided to hide himself in the House of the Dead with the ring. Now, I know that's improbable and unlikely, but the question comes up, and there was an article written about it. What would happen if that happened? My initial thought before I turn it over to you guys is that the ring would be found. Gollum couldn't just walk around and hunt anything and scowl and skulk at will. He'd be found by the soldiers, and the ring of power would go to the King of the Dead. Now, with the ring of power going to him and him already being dead and already cursed and not really interested in wealth or riches anymore, he's not really of the first plane where he can be corrupted the way that Boromir or even Gandalf to a certain degree could be tempted and corrupted. What is your guys' estimation on the interesting little lore triangulation and conundrum that there is with the King of the Dead having a ring of power?
Well, I think you're correct in stating that Gollum wouldn't last in that. He wouldn't go there to begin with because there's no food, as you stated. But if we ignore the logic of that he wouldn't go where there's no food, and he somehow wandered in there, he's not going to get out of there once he's in there. Let's say he wasn't trying to live there. Maybe he was just trying to hide from something or something. I don't know what he would be doing in Rohan. But, the ring is an interesting thing because these guys, they're not evil in any sense. They're just they just didn't do what they promised to do. They made an oath and they didn't fulfill it, and they didn't do terrible deeds like Feanor did. It was not terrible deeds that anchored them to the world and denied them the gift of man until they made their peace. It was the lack of a deed, and it's like what we said earlier, that it's not even that Iluvatar wants them to fight Sauron, it's that he doesn't want them to take his name in vain, that he doesn't want to be called upon to view an oath and then for somebody to just not fulfill their oath. So that being said, as you stated, I don't think that there's any particular hook that the ring could make in them. They're mortal, but they're not alive. They the ring, I think, wouldn't even have any kind of power over them. Much like I always.
Doesn't that make the King of the Dead kind of almost a weird conundrum of power if he actually had it?
Well,
I mean, because Sauron is still in soot form in Mordor, so he's basically Necromancer plus level. And any army he would send, take it from the Army of the Dead, is going to get wiped out by the Army of the Dead. So I'm just curious about your take on all that as well.
Sid wants to speak, but before he does, I just want to say I was trying to say was that he couldn't use the ring, though. He couldn't master it. Isildur couldn't master it. I don't think this guy could. But go ahead, Sid.
I'm going to disagree. It's all speculation.
It's heavy speculation.
I believe Isildur couldn't master the ring because the ring wanted to hide. It has a will of its own.
Mm-hmm.
But two things come to my mind on this question. So the ring falls, Gollum is caught or passes away, and the ring falls to any of the dead who worship their king as a king, and they bring it to him because obviously it's a powerful thing. It belongs to their king. Take it that far. You now have an oath breaker with the ring. And that's the first thing that comes to mind. And remember how significant it was that Gollum was a murderer in his first act with the ring, whereas Bilbo's first act was one of pity. So now you have someone whose act is that of an oathbreaker. And also, there's a similarity in a way between Gollum and the undead, because Gollum ran and hid under the misty mountains. The undead ran up into the mountains and hid when they were supposed to show up for battle. So there's question one is, what can a coward do with the One Ring? And the other thing that comes to mind is the Lord of the Nazgul. Their weapon is fear, but these little kitties are scared just like your dog is on the 4th of July.
I'm gonna have to bleep you there, Sid.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
I said kitties.
Wait, let me. No, you said scared, and then you said crapless, but you didn't say crap.
Oops, sorry about that. So very scared of water, very scared
fire
of
as well. Yeah.
Exactly. So
we answered the same question about that today.
Yeah, I think that you would end up having someone who what he'd seek is the release of death, and he could use the ring to create some kind of necromancy, attempting, probably failing, since it was he's fighting Eru if he tries, but he has an intent to release himself from being undead using a necromantic ring from a necromantic power that had created the undead Nazgul to begin with. I don't have my imagination is dark enough for that one.
I think no matter what. I'm sorry to cut you off.
It's a great creepy question. I'll stop there.
I'm sorry to cut you off, but we are running low on time for this subject. But I think no matter what, whenever we get into these what ifs, I always tell people that Tolkien's Legendarium is like a tapestry, and when you start tugging on the threads, the whole thing falls apart. And whenever you get into what if this happened or what if that happened, I will answer some of these questions, but a lot of times I start off with, well, Sauron wins because the ring doesn't get destroyed. It doesn't go to Mount Doom.
Let me just try, if I can conclude real quick. The Nazgul are the ones that are trying to find the ring. And if the Nazgul are killable, well, they're killable in a certain degree. They don't make it anywhere near the Paths of the Dead in one piece. And so, yes, I agree with Sid saying they'll probably try to hide it. It probably would augment his power for sure. He wouldn't be able to get the death that he's seeking because that's not the way the ring works, and that's not the way the curse works. But my point really isn't so much the the over nerdification of the conundrum. It's really kind of an exploratory about the nature of the dead king and how would the ring of power operate as an experiment in operational power, not so much the conundrum itself. It's an interesting conundrum, a weird triangulation of lore that I thought that uncovered some interesting little nuggets. If we think about, how powerful does that make the undead king if he has the ring and nobody can find the ring because he's able to kill everybody looking for it?
It's not that different from something I saw today on Core about, well, what if the Barrow-wight killed Frodo and got the ring? And, the Barrow-wight is the same sort of creature, that it's a man that is anchored to the world by some sort of necromancy and cannot leave. Yeah. But like I said, it always winds up being, well, the ring doesn't get destroyed. In the sense of just the purely speculative form of what would it do for these creatures, I don't know that it would do very much, because they don't go anywhere or do anything.
The one thing that's important
until Aragorn comes along.
The distinction is that yes, you're right about the aspect of the Barrow-wight, but the undead king a different situation, and he has an army behind him. So it makes it very interesting just to think about the nature of those magical and curse elements to the story. That's all.
I just think that he
Oh, one,
wouldn't ever
one
come
final
out of the
note.
mountain.
Yeah. I agree, except remember what was said at Council of Elrond, that if they'd managed to take the ring out to the deep sea and dump it in, I think the exact words, and I think it was Gandalf, you guys will correct me on
It
this,
was Gandalf.
was um, these things have a way of being found.
Hmm.
And going back, Matt, I'm guessing, would would the land of the undead south of Rohan be something like Spain in the modern world?
Well, it is a part of Gondor, so it would be Italy.
Italy. Okay, so
It'd be northern. It'd be
perhaps.
northern. It'd
Yeah.
be it'd be northern Italy to
Yeah.
southern Germany,
Oh, okay.
France.
So what we're saying is, um, during World War II, the ring would have returned,
Yeah.
and it would have ended up with our good old friend. What was his name?
Sauron.
King, no, no, the king of Italy in World War II.
Oh,
What
Mussolini?
was his?
Mussolini.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Mussolini would have gotten the ring, and we'd be
Okay.
up Craft Creek.
Yeah. Just watch the language today, Sid. Remember, my YouTube is family friendly. Okay, well, that's all the time for that. Okay, so I guess it's
Okay,
my turn.
Creek.
I guess it's my turn now.
Thanks, guys. I appreciated the feedback. That's good.
Yeah.
Good stuff.
Okay, so what I wanted to, let me set the timer for myself for 3 minutes here. What I wanted to talk about here was, if you guys remember in the very first episode we did, we spoke about what are the subjects that we're just tired of hearing about, that we find to be tiresome or repetitive or disingenuous. And I kind of want to go in the opposite direction here and ask you guys what are the topics, or perhaps even specific questions, that when you see them come through on Quora, or for me as well as on YouTube or Twitter or whatever, that make your eyes just light up and you're like, I finally get to talk about this. Like, what are the questions and the topics that spark joy in you and make you really happy to be doing what you're doing? And I guess I didn't really need 3 minutes, because that's all I have to say for the intro. So let me just reset that to a half hour. You know what? Let me just start that timer and say, for me, and people would think, they often think that I get annoyed with these sort of things, but I don't. It's quite the opposite. But that I actually really enjoy it when I get to speak with people who are very new to the lore and new to the legendarium, and speak in an incredibly enthusiastic manner about the deeper lore. When we get these young ones that have seen the films perhaps and are interested, and then they'll be tooling around on Quora, and they'll come across an answer, whether it's one of mine or one of Matt's or one of Sid's or anybody else in our group, and they'll be like, wait a minute, like, Gandalf's an angel? Wait, hold on, like, could we talk about that? Can you tell me about that? And to get this sort of like way of explaining the lore in a layman terms, I really enjoy that. When somebody says to me, wait a minute, Gandalf's an angel. Wait, hold on, let's explain that. Sauron as well, he's an angel. One of the videos that I did on my YouTube channel that was like one of the first ones to really blow up was titled, Is Sauron the Devil? And I get that a lot. And I remember Tolkien's actual response when asked about that was, he's not the devil, but he does know him. It's just, for me, guiding the new, we'll say the neophytes into the realms of becoming a Tolkien scholar is very joyful for me, and I enjoy boiling it down to a simpler language. One of my biggest answers was about Gandalf and the Balrog and the speech he made. You cannot pass. I'm a servant of the secret fire, wielder of the flame of Anor. You cannot pass. The dark flame shall not avail you. Flame of Udun, you cannot pass. And I translated that into modern English. And I said, basically, he's saying, you cannot pass. I am a servant of God. My flames are as bright as the sun. You cannot harm me. go back to the Hellfire. And people were really taken by that, and they said, I always thought in the movie when he said that it was just like a spell, or because he says it so quickly, or some sort of like magical mumbo jumbo that didn't actually mean anything. And people get very excited when I talk about this, and I get very excited when I talk about this stuff. So what do you guys get excited when you talk about? Sid?
I'd like to go first just because I can lead on from that. There are two things that are getting me excited. The larger one is the characters that we know little about, but enough about to explore. This week, someone mentioned Nienna, and I don't remember the exact context, but it was something about perhaps Nienna would have intervened in a certain way. And very much, and also for me, Goldberry for sure. I think she does far more to Frodo than we get credit for, than is given credit. I talked about that last month. And so, and all of the feminine dimension of fairy creatures, Ainur, and the Valar, and the fact that Gandalf was a student of Nienna, and what does that mean about dreams and the feminine dimension in Oloran as well, bringing those stories forth. So that's one whole dimension, and of course that includes Arian and the sun, and and therefore what is righteous and healthy light, like Arian, of whom Morgoth was both incredibly envious and also terrified.
He had a complicated relationship with light.
Yeah, and whereas the Balrogs might have been like Arian had they not fallen. So there's something about
I love that you said that.
Volcanic light. Yeah, volcanic light is the earth trying to be the sun in a sense.
Yeah, I love that you said that about Arian.
And terribly powerful on earth, but Morgoth can no longer. This is something in the first book of Lost Tales. Morgoth can no longer lift himself into the higher realms, what we would call outer space, what the Greeks called the aether or ether.
The ether.
Yes. The ether, the realm of
Elysian.
High mountain air. Yeah, of high mountain air. And somebody once pointed out that if you look at mountains in Greece, because of the distortions of atmosphere, they literally look like they're floating above the clouds.
You get a Roger Dean painting there. You know?
Yeah, so they're the Olympian airs.
Yeah.
And what we now call outer space. Morgoth had bound himself to the earth so deeply he could not rise into them, and that's why the light of the sun and moon were so threatening when they appeared, because there was nothing he could do.
Far out of his reach. I agree that when we go into the importance of the feminine aspects of spirits and Arian and Nienna and everything, that actually gets me excited too, because I mean, you read my paper on tour. I wound up talking just as much about Ulmo and Nienna as being, in my opinion, the two most important of the Valar. Especially, Ulmo through the masculine side of war and genealogies and making sure that everybody was in the place that they needed to be, whereas Nienna was making sure that everyone had the knowledge and the wisdom that they needed through her student Oloran, who passed on those teachings to Frodo, and that's why the ring was destroyed in the end. Matt.
And Weenan, really quickly, Weenan also as the feminine disciple of Ulmo and able to calm down her angry the waters.
I had a question about the Ainur. Did they ever visit the furthest of the Hitherlands, like the Far Harad and far to the east and such? And I said, we know the Blue Wizards went there. We know Saruman went there. Beyond them, I would say through conjecture that Ulmo is present in all the waters, and that wherever there were storms, there is Osse, and wherever there is Osse, there is Uinen, because storms end. But Matt, what gets you going? What gets you all excited? What brings a smile to your face?
There's a couple of beauties. You guys know me, so you're not going to be surprised by some of this, but you might be surprised by a couple of them. As a dovetail to something you just said, um, when you were talking about um, um, the Valar being in Middle Earth in the early ancient days, they would have made all the elements, and even though some of the permutations of things that came about would have been surprising to them, which is a harken back to what Tolkien writes in the Silmarillion, that a lot of things would happen that weren't exactly predictable, and they would be amazing as they unfold into the future. And I think the rest of Middle Earth that we see is kind of in that kind of a vein. Um, but Tom Bombadil always gets me excited because of the concept of when he came in, the fact that he is the master of wood, water, and hill, and I've never taken that including after all of my research on him, as meaning only wood, water, and hill, just in the old forest. There's a lot of there's a couple of very powerful people who think he is the master of wood, water, and hill, including himself, and that puts him in a realm of a little bit of what I would call total Middle Earth awareness, very similar to the girdle of Melian's girdle. That there's some kind of an attachment, a connection, an awareness, a vibration of knowledge of things that are happening in the world. And any question that looks like it's tickling the awesome power of the assignment that Tom Bombadil has in the world, I will answer immediately. Um, Other thing would be the idea, any question that gets with in any realm of Morgoth's ability to corrupt and not create, because I think so much of it wasn't able to be described by Tolkien because he wrote this in the 30s and 40s and 50s and 60s. And I think a lot of those questions are places that I'm personally not afraid to go to figure out things, in other words, like what I call the single Melian model of creation, in which a Maya and a physical being of Middle Earth would, out of love, create Luthien, and that model is something I believe Tolkien gives us to figure out without describing it in detail. Gives us the ability to figure out what Melkor is doing with this corrupted natural process that he's corrupting to make trolls and orcs and things like that. So that always gets me excited. Anything to do with the deep harmony and music of the Ainulindala as the cosmos and the metaphysical and physics orientation of the universe always gets me excited. A War of Wrath and the numbers of troops that might have been involved. I love any indication that will help us figure that out, including the Iron Age and Bronze Age research related to what's called the 3% rule, which is 3% of the population is usually men of arms, and another 3% is usually qualified to be in the reserve. And so, when you can extrapolate numbers in the few times that Tolkien gives us any numbers of armies or rough ideas, it kind of gives you an idea about how to back logic or reverse engineer the number of people that might have come from that realm. Just as an example, 20,000 elves in a 3% rule would indicate that that army came from a elven population of about 660 to 700,000 elves. Um, and I know that's a rough estimate, but it goes to this principle
It's a
that
ballpark
Tolkien is
figure.
talking about. Yeah, it's a ballpark. I understand a lot of people aren't comfortable with an exact number, but that's why I give ballpark numbers. But the idea is that the Iron Age and um, the Bronze Age and the Middle Ages, all by historical research, bear out this 3% rule. And so when you take that, you're on some decent ground. And I always love those kind of questions. The only other thing I would really get excited about would be character power type comparisons. I did an article just a couple weeks ago about whether Eowyn could take out all 7 of the Balrogs, and the answer to that is, you'll have to read it. No, I'm kidding. Um,
I saw your answer.
the answer is, you did. Okay. I'd like to have your response to that. Be gentle, John, but I those kind of questions really are interesting to me because Eowyn is a serious Maya,
He's
and when
he's
Tolkien writes
he's the top guy. I don't think a lot of
the
people
top
miss that. He is the greatest of the Maya.
guy, he is the greatest, and Tolkien
Beyond
very
Sauron?
specific.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
maybe
let me explain.
yes, I would say yes because Sauron at his height he was a craftsman and he was an inventor, but he was not a great warrior or a vanguard like Ianwa was. Remember that Sauron chose to surrender himself specifically to Ianwa.
Yeah, and
But
let me
well,
just finish my let me just
okay. I'll wait.
yeah, let me finish, and we'll get to that. Um, last thing I was going to say was that Melian and Sauron are really high up there. Sauron is definitely the most powerful Maya sorcerer, and I think maybe that's where
Magically, yes.
Sid is going. Yeah, that's true. And Eowyn doesn't have any of those kind of real powers, and that would be an interesting match between those two. But the question really was going back to Tolkien's assessment or statement that Eowyn was the greatest warrior of arms in all of Arda, and that means
Yeah,
including the Vala,
including Tulkas,
and that
including Oroma. Yes,
yes, with arms.
yes,
Now Tolkien also says that as far as raw strength, by with his own bare hands
yeah.
and wrestling and all that, Tulkas is the most powerful. So getting back to my
Yeah.
last point is that Anway is so big and so fast and so powerful with arms that all 7 of those Balrogs
They don't stand a
they
chance.
do
No,
not
I agree
survive.
with you. I read your answer and I thought it was an excellent answer. I want to
Thank
circle
you,
back
John.
to not only that, but something that Sid said about Aryan. I love when she's brought up. That sparks joy in me because she's a very interesting character that he had a lot of ideas about. Not all of them made them into the text. Some of them are in Lost Tales and such. One of my favorite things to tell people is that she is basically what a Balrog could be if they did not fall. What a true spirit of flame in its full majesty and beauty. Somebody who was so beautiful that she was difficult to look at. She was so radiant that she burned Morgoth when he tried to get a little handsy with her.
She was super smoking hot.
Yeah, exactly. And I made a joke about this, and I love when I get to make a joke. This is another thing that a lot of people don't always see the sense of humor in what I write on Quora, but a lot of times I'm not as serious as people think I am. Where I talked about Melkor specifically and what he was attracted to, and I said he had a very big attraction to light. The first woman that he ever asked out was Varda, the mother of the stars, and then he had a thing for Aryan, the sun herself. Basically, she bears the sun through the sky. And I just said I had to just basically do a womp womp thing. He really likes the hot ladies, and when I get to make a joke like that, it makes me very happy. The reason that I brought this topic up at all was because there was somebody in the chat who was saying that what makes Aryan so interesting is that she's a curiosity, she's a mystery. There was a question that came through, and I always love when it's something that like we don't know or can't know, but we can offer our conjecture as lore masters. Where let me bring up the person's name. I want to give them proper credit for asking this question here. This came in from Matt Wren. I'm sure you guys have seen Matt's questions here and there. Not to be confused with Matt Richardson, who asked
And by
basically.
the way, hi Matt Brand. Nice to have you call in.
Yeah. Basically, if Melkor had never fallen, if he had remained righteous, what would the world look like? Would another Dark Lord arise? And I said, I thought about it a little bit, and I said, like we can imagine all these scenarios, and this was the thumbnail topic of my most recent video that I put up just yesterday. What if there was no Morgoth, basically? And this brought me such joy because I said it's a good question, and this is the first line of my answer. This is a very good question, by which I mean to say that the answer is purely in the realm of speculation, where it's something that Tolkien did not speak about, but that we, as Matt likes to say, as lore masters, can come up with an educated response and something that makes perfect sense and can be considered preponderant canon, as Matt says. So, and I thought about this a great deal, and I want to get both of your answers to this question as well. But I thought about, well, I mean, would there be just a permanent spring of Arda? Would he be married to Varda? Would Sauron be this wonderful guy who just creates order? And then I said, you know what? None of that. The world wouldn't exist. And I said that basically, if you look at the Ainulindale, they have this concert where all the angels come before God, and he hums a tune. He leads them in a theme. He goes, and then they all, and they improvise and they build off of it. And one guy got it in his head to try and ruin the show by playing a different genre of music, discordant themes. And if you look at the exact words of Iluvatar, the entirety of the world, he said, let there be light. No, behold your music. And you will see all the thoughts of your mind, and especially you, Melkor, for you're the mightiest, and we know that. But you don't have any power that doesn't come from me. And you're going to see all the thoughts in your mind and what they lead to. And I have come to believe that if not for Melkor's rebellion, if not for the War of Music, he would not have created a world. Because the entire thing was a lesson for Melkor to learn. Now, I want to get your guys. Sid was waving his hand. What you think of this?
I'd like to go I'd like to go last.
Okay, Matt. What do you think of the question? If there never was a Morgoth, Melkor never fell. Do you think the world would exist? And if it existed, what state would it be in?
Yeah. Thank you. I'll address that, but just to give Sid back his time, I think earlier he interjected and wanted to say something about the Sauron Eowyn thing, and I didn't want to have him not
yes, that's true.
Be in the cycle. Sid, did you want to reclaim some time on that issue?
Yeah, you got to press the button, Sid.
Point. Oh, I'll pick up on a different point, but let Matt go ahead and finish. I really want to have the last piece unbroken. Yeah. You can tell me how many minutes I've got when we get there.
Okay.
Oh, okay. John, that's a really great question.
That's why I said it. It made me happy to see it.
Yeah. That's a deep question and a great way to answer.
It's just great for Matt Wren for asking that.
Yeah, well, Matt's a sharp guy, and I love his questions. As a lot of you know, I'm a retired philosophy professor, and the answer comes from this concept of bell curve, and what's called theory of gradation. I won't get into describing it, but I'll just say, without a spectrum, from the left to the right, if you want to call it, it's not political, but it's just without a bell curve spectrum, and without Morgoth showing where the depraved end of the bell curve is, you wouldn't have a paradigm that had a destructive element as far to the end of the bell curve as you would have with him in the story. So if he was not the fallen angel aspect of the story, your next person that could possibly be evil, let's say, because there's no dragons, there's no Balrogs that are corrupted, there's none of that, would be something like I mean, it wouldn't even be the wizards, because they would have never been sent into Middle-earth, probably.
Could it possibly be Aula and his love of crafts?
Yes, you would have. That's a good point. I agree with that. You would have Aula trying to make the dwarves, being chastised and being forgiven by Eru for making the dwarves and having their birth into the world be delayed to a time that Eru thinks is appropriate. That act itself would then end up being the new left-hand side of the bell curve in the paradigm of Ea. So it would be these attempts at deviating and singing discordant verses in the Ainulindale that in the end become the new rebellious end of the bell curve, so that everything would really be would be orientedly different in that way.
I love what you said, because it even though it's different, it basically agrees that evil needs to exist for the world to be the world. It there's no curve, there's no beauty in it. You don't appreciate good without there being evil. Sid, we have
and
about.
what's
Oh, go for
interesting,
it.
and one last thing is what's interesting is once the curve has got a new paradigm left and right to the whole bell curve, nobody in that paradigm, even us readers, would know anything beyond that paradigm. So it becomes its own totality of knowledge. There isn't any way to get outside of what was been given to us or the people of Middle Earth. So it becomes the real new reality.
Sid, we still have like 7 minutes, so you can go ahead and go ham.
Thank you. Actually, what you guys were talking about illuminated what I already wanted to say. I want to briefly mention one other thing that I am drawn to question, but then how it ties back into this. Tolkien says two things about the greatest evil. One is evil, the light, all those under Eru are united under Eru, and light join well together. But darkness splits from darkness and always fights against darkness, except one exception, when Sauron takes over Numenor and creates a worship of Morgoth. He says that that worship was of almost a united Sauron Morgoth mind.
Yes, 100%.
Radically increasing the power of evil.
Yes.
To the point where you almost say Sauron and Morgoth are one. I don't want to talk more about that because to look too closely into the
you're right though. You're right.
The mind of evil caused us to fall.
Yeah.
But then picking up, what if all that didn't happen? There's a very interesting theological view that all of the suffering in the world is just bad timing. If the salvation of the world came before the fall, we wouldn't have any problems. So Matt introduced, delay of what I want is what frustrates materials like Ale, trying to make things when we want them, rushing into it, as I've talked about in my discussion of the fall of angels. And so the whole world becomes seen as, let's get the timing right. So what we actually have is the island Nindali in rehearsal got clumsy and had bad timing, and the music isn't beautiful enough yet. And the note I want to end on is very simple. We don't know what the world would be like without Melkor falling to become Morgoth, but we will. We know
in Arda Unmarred. Absolutely.
In Arda Unmarred, the world will be remade without Morgoth, or I have an idea.
Yeah, and some of the children know this. Galadriel knew it. She said it to Treebeard that we will meet in Beleriand after the world is remade.
Yeah, and that brings me to my very last point. The thing that I'm drawn to most these days is writing fan fiction. And if you want my view of what happens at the end of the world, it'll only take, it's a 5-minute read called,
I'm going to put a link to your archive in my the video version.
I have two stories out there very much along these lines, and one is the title contains the word "the end of all things."
Yeah.
And it's the story of all of the ring bearers at the end of time. And I also have one along these lines about the grief of Elrond. So please go enjoy, because I think this leads us to imaginative creativity of endless growing wonders. And John, I do believe that the world would have been created just as, if you have an opera, if you have a concert, someone will make an opera out of it. So the world would have been created for the beauty of it. And that's the world I look forward to all of us giving birth to by getting our timing right and putting good before evil.
there's a basic question that comes through a lot that you sort of hinted at here, which was why doesn't Iluvatar just fix everything? Why doesn't he just remove all the evil and make everything better? And I always say that when people ask this, what you're really asking is why do bad things happen to good people? Why does evil even exist? And that Iluvatar said himself that it all comes from him, that they have no power that doesn't come from him. And I tell them, would you appreciate the day if there was no night? Would you be courageous if there was no danger? Would you appreciate the warmth if it was never cold? It gives meaning to it.
I'd like to take a different look at this one. If Eru is the creator, the father, usually the parent of us all, does he want us to remain children forever?
And it's an interesting thing that he calls us the children.
Exactly. And maybe God's problem on this one is very simple. It's the same problem a lot of parents have these days with a 25-year-old who went to college, got out of college, got messed up in drugs, and is living back at home. We don't want to keep him in the house, living a childish life and never growing up. We want our children to grow up to be greater than we are. So perhaps we are the children of the divine in the very sense of, but now we're adult children. We are the solution. And only we can fix our own problems individually. Whatever problems I make, I have to correct. And whatever I see around me where I can help, I can lend a hand. And maybe all 8 billion of us, the problem is God did send a solution, and the solution he sent is us.
Yeah.
So
I think you kind of gave me the idea of what I'm going to talk about next time. I'm not going to say it now, but you inspired me. A minute left, Matt, if you want to just end off on something here.
I just love what Sid said. I agree with that completely. Tolkien is about the celebration of the valiant and the aware.
We really came full circle on that, didn't we?
Yeah, we really. Well, today was a really good show.
Yeah, I gotta say the first segment went by like that, and here we are talking about we've come back to the first thing. We've created the ring here.
Yeah, I would just quickly.
It's an ascending spiral.
It's a helix.
It's going to get better next month.
It's a helix.
Exactly. It's going to get better. It's going to get better month after month now. That's my final statement.
Yeah. Well, I was just going to say real quick is that we come back to this theme of the valiant and the aware, and in being valiant and aware and brave, we earn our modernity and we earn our free will. And those are both gifts, and we honor them by doing those things for Eru, for the creator, God that made all of this, including Tolkien, which made this paradigm to make this happen. My last comment real quick is, the more I talk about this kind of stuff, the more I just absolutely love the concept of Melian. Melian in the world is so beautiful and so massively powerful. That I just wish that there was a way to do a movie just on her and Doriath. Oh my gosh, I tell you, they'd make billions of dollars.
Well, you know how shy they are about that kind of thing. I don't know if we'll ever, if in our lifetime, I should say, if we'll get to see these stories of the First Age on the big screen like that. I would love to see them. I mean,
well, if anybody comes to hire us as consultants, which we now do, they're going to make billions of dollars.
There was a question. We're out of time, but we're just musing it. So there's a question that came through about what are the moments from those old stories from the Silmarillion that you would love to see on the big screen. I think it might have even came from Dutch, or at least I know that me and Dutch had a whole conversation about it afterwards, where he said that my description of some of these moments as not what Tolkien wrote, but as cinema, it gave him goosebumps and chills. And I had chosen a few moments. One of them was the end of the Children of Húrin, and specifically showing Húrin and his reaction to all the terrible things that had happened and whatnot. Another one was Earendil arriving at the War of Wrath, and I described that in a rather cinematic sort of way. But one of them, I decided I said I needed an epic, a tragic, and a romantic. The epic is obviously Earendil arriving, and the way I described it was very like it would give like these big movies like the Marvel and the Star Wars movies. They would look small compared to the War of Wrath. And of course the tragic is the Children of Húrin. But then I said I wanted the romantic as well. And the moment that I chose and the way I described it was I just imagined the meeting of Melian and Ilúthingol in the forest, where they touch hands and they can't move or say anything or do anything for centuries because they're so immediately in love with each other. And I said, the camera pans around them, the seasons change, the stars wheel overhead, and years pass, and nobody knows where Thingol is. And they just decided to settle down in the area, and I mean, yeah, that's a hell of a meet cute, as they say.
Yeah.
For me,
if I can interject,
as you were speaking, what came to mind was Elwing leaping into the ocean and turning into a bird.
Oh yeah, that's a great one too.
Oh,
yeah. And then when she dives down and he catches her and she becomes an elf again.
Yeah, awesome. But a couple that came to my mind were the great sentiment for me would be the orcs that actually try to find their way into Doriath, into Menegroth, and they get lost because the nature of the passages related to Melian's girdle is that everyone becomes disoriented and they walk themselves right back out. They can't get in and they walk themselves back out. And the ones that don't walk out are shot by the sentinels that are in there. And the other one is the fact that there's got to be Huorns and Ents in that massive forest as well. So it just seems like just the most amazing
we know for a
place.
fact, Dara.
And I agree, and the passages clearly indicate that's got to be there. But the idea that the girdle of Melian, is so all-knowing and powerful and disorienting, and nobody can find it because they get confused and then they get killed and they get stomped.
I wrote about this really recently too.
It's great sentiment to me to think about it. And the only other one that I love is when Eowyn and his team of Maya, which I think were Maya probably, corner Morgoth in his dungeons and hew his legs off. And without his legs, he probably was put on a cart after having his crown
the phrase was his legs were hewn from under him. But Sid's been raising his hand. We're well past time, but let's just keep rolling for a little while. Sid, go ahead and say something.
Those are my best ones.
I want to end on a completely different and a final note, if I may.
Go ahead.
I want to go back to the beginning of Before Time, before the Ainul Indale. And there are these angels in practice rooms, learning to sing and play instruments, or be instruments. We're not quite sure which.
It was both.
And Eru personally stops by and tutors each angel, teaching that angel to become a master musician.
And that fits the lore too.
Yeah, I'd like to have like a half-hour intro before the Ainul Indale starts, where we hear what it is like, and we see the beauty of Eru coming to Manwë, and even Melkor, and Aule, and Yavanna, and Elbereth, and even Olorin.
All of them,
and teaching them to sing and play beautiful music. And the movie ends on the first court of the Ainul Indale, which will be the sequel. That's the one I want to see.
That's what you want to see. I mean, it did mention that they had come to him and played music in singles or in small groups. And the idea of the Ainul Indale was not that it was the first music, but that it was the first music of all of them together. But anyway, guys, we got to...
I'm sorry that I mispronounce it sometimes, but that's the
Well,
way we pronounce it in New Mordor in the Fourth Age.
which
Ainulindala.
Ainulindala is correct. Well, actually, Ainulindala is correct. But
Just saying I
when
pronounce
it
it
comes
differently
to, I
from New
mean, when it
Mordor.
comes to, I know, when it when it comes to the pronunciations, the accents, it can get a little bit weird. Like you sometimes lapse into saying Legolas, which is not incorrect.
Thank you, John.
I just want to point that out, that everybody and their mother says Legolas. And
I'm
that's
trying to make fun of the
also,
fact that I'm
that's,
trying to make fun of the fact that I got stuck. I'm trying to make
well,
fun of the fact that I got stuck with Mordor, and in New Mordor in the Fourth Age, we
yeah.
pronounce things a little bit differently.
Yeah, okay, that's how it is. Well, like, just the one that you do that I cringe at is you say Fingolfin.
I know I
I
did that
know
one wrong.
that one bothered. But I mean, the difference in pronunciation, Legolas, Legolas, there's an argument that they're both correct. So we would have to ask him what his preferred way of speaking his name is. Unfortunately, he doesn't talk much. But anyway, we do have to end here. So thank you guys for coming by. We're going to go over the stream schedule for the next week or so for those of you who join for the gaming streams and such. So I need to come over here and well, not Mario. We're done with that. So tomorrow night, tomorrow afternoon, I should say, I will be playing Paper Mario: The Thousand Year Door for the GameCube. That's tomorrow afternoon. Saturday night, more of Xenoblade Chronicles X for the Wii U. Sunday night, more of Castlevania Curse of Darkness for PS2. Monday afternoon, more of Street Fighter Alpha 3 Upper for the PlayStation. Tuesday night, oh man, we're going to be going to this game again. We're going to be playing Eterna Noctis on Steam. I have no idea how long this game is, but it's an experience. That's all I could tell you guys if you haven't seen it. Wednesday afternoon, Super Mario Brothers Wonder on the Switch. And then Thursday night, a week from today, I'm actually going to be going over to... I'm going to have my friend EB Agent Jay on with me, and we're going to play Final Fantasy VIII. Or they're going to play Final Fantasy VIII, and I'm going to commentate because there's no way you're catching me playing this game. But anyway, and yeah, that's our schedule for the next week or so. So let's go over to...
So for the good of the order, though, we got to remember to cover when we're
here.
going to be on next.
Yes, of course. I was getting to that. Okay, so the next Council of Tolkien meeting will actually be August 1st.
Okay.
August 1st.
Very good.
So, because the Thursdays, I've made them sort of my podcast and talk show sort of day, because we have this, and then I'm recording with EB on the 11th. On the 18th, we'll have the List Critics. And on the 25th, I'll be reading The Hobbit again. So, it's become an interesting day of the week for us. So,
yeah.
Plugs, visit.
Remember,
hold on. Let me do I'm trying to outro here.
Sorry.
Visit loremaster.com. Visit all of us on Quora. There is a link to all of that in the description. Loremaster.com. Me on Quora. Matt on Quora. Sid on Quora. And I'm also going to link to Sid's fanfiction archive as well, since he mentioned it, and I'm sure some of you guys would be very interested for that.
By the way, it's lord-master.com.
The link is in the description, so they don't have to worry about spelling it right. So don't worry about it. All they got to do is click. It makes it a lot easier. That's like when I do my promos, and I say twitch.tv/NickReviewMX, and I go, or just click the link in the description, because that's easier. Who's going to type all that out, right? Yeah, obviously. But if you're on, and on Quora also, there's two lore masters. This is the legitimate, genuine lore master, not that other guy. We don't know what he's all about. Have they gotten rid of that account yet, Matt?
I don't know, but the one you want is all connected. Lore master, no space.
Yeah, one word. All right, well, let me see.
You guys go by your own name, John
Sierra and Sid Camp. That's correct. Like I said, the links are there. Let's see who we're gonna raid today. Unfortunately, there's no Tolkien related streams on my list, so we can't go ahead and raid Corey Olsen this time. I think I'm gonna raid Wade, since I haven't seen him in a while. He's playing Mass Effect Legendary Edition. So we'll head over there. By the way, gentlemen, while I'm setting up this raid, somebody compared me to Corey Olsen not too long ago, but they were being mean about it, if you can believe it. I had this
Sean, why would anybody be mean to you?
Well, people are mean to other people all the time. I'm nothing special. But this guy, he got into a whole thing with me on YouTube where he was just being increasingly hostile. And he told me, you're just like that Corey Olsen. He called him lamentable, which I thought was funny. And I was like, that guy's like one of my heroes here. He's the reason I decided to start doing this. So if you're comparing me to him is an insult, you have missed the mark.
Reality check, John, and actually I'll ask Matt as well. In my time on Quora, I have had 2 sincere death threats.
Wow, I've never had that. That's crazy. Did you report that?
No, for specific reasons I didn't. For one thing, each of them was not on the same continent, so I wasn't too worried.
Okay, just report them to Quora to get them off of there. That kind of behavior isn't acceptable.
No, actually, they had legitimate religious and philosophical perspectives that I respect.
Okay.
Just a little, what I might call, of limited perspective.
I understand.
Patience.
Last month we had spoken about. There's a raid call, guys. Copy that, paste it as we head into Wage Stream. Last month we talked about this, about how there was that great comment that talked about how Tolkien's creation myth is actually more beautiful than the Genesis creation myth, which he called a crime and punishment sort of thing. And I said, just the good thing is that nobody has been killed over their opinions on Tolkien, but apparently Sid has gotten death threats, so it's terrible.
It was my spiritual opinions about spiritual love, actually, that got me in trouble.
Wow.
I would just say that going forward, anybody who sends you a letter that has a threat that was stamped with anything from Mordor, then maybe you should take it seriously.
Well, if I see that
from me,
if it didn't come from you, then I might have to report that. But if it came from you,
that'd be weird.
I'll just send you a text like, "Is this you?"
Yeah, Matt, I kind of see you as an older brother. If I get another one,
okay.
I'll just have you.
Stream is ending in 3 seconds, guys.
I'll send a note to Mordor for help.